like a 3, 2, 1, and then
Yeah,
yes.
that's it. And now we are recording, JC. Okay.
All
So, what I guess, I mean, want to talk to you about is a few other things and anything maybe that you'd wanted to talk about that you hadn't and that you might have thought about during the week. And I know that there was a good reaction, favorable reaction to everything you had said. And a lot of people commented that it was a very good interview. And like, of course, what do they mean by that? Does it mean that they're interested in it? It doesn't necessarily mean that they either agree with everything you said or were happy to hear everything you said. But there's definitely, when somebody reads like a mystery book, it's not necessarily they like the characters, but it's exciting. And it's certainly, talk of the Freemasons or the Masons or the Illuminati or the Templars or any of those things like that. It's very interesting and fascinating. It's a page turner, but you wouldn't want necessarily to have it in your life. And definitely, I mean, one guy, he felt conflicted about it. And I think, as I said at the time, and I think that I won't be surprised at your answer. I think you will agree with me that you would absolutely encourage his right to disagree or question or be skeptical about anything. So I'll hand it off to you now, and with that, sort of ask you: do you agree that everybody, as I think, should have the ability to politely disagree or hold their judgment in reserve and whatnot? What do you think, JC?
absolutely. Um, obviously, like, as I said before, I come from an Orthodox worldview these days, and you know, not tampering with people's free will, that's something that, God wouldn't want to mess with your free will, so why should I have the right to mess with it? Unless you've committed a crime or done something that would cause us to have to violate that, sacred thing, then I don't see why it should be. You know?
Yeah, I mean, what would you think is a transgression of this sort of implicit agreement, this sacred vow? I'm taking it as like, that all natural beings would just know naturally that everybody has agreements like do no harm to each other or only in self-defense should you raise your fists or these kind of things. How would you characterize a transgression of these kind of implicit understandings?
Well, obviously, like I'm going to turn to, the 10 commandments and things like that, no murder and stuff like that. Though I would disagree with you on thinking that these are, just inherently a natural feeling. You know, I mean, some people may, but however, some people might decide that it's better to be God emperor and to subjugate everyone on the planet underneath their whim, It's it's kind of one of those things that it's not a guarantee that society is going to come to that conclusion. Yeah. It's really with Christianity that that we really got this into the societal milieu, if you will. A lot of modern people, I find, don't really realize this. They think that the civilization that we have, the peace and quiet that we are able to get, to what degree we can get it, in different places, that varies. But for the most part, here in the West, we enjoy quite a bit of peace and quiet compared to a lot of other places in the world, and that's mostly because of the Christian mindset and philosophy being injected into society. But now, as that's fading away since the schism, as things have fractured and people have lost that epistemology, they've lost that understanding, society is starting to fall apart. You know, I,
Yeah, well, JC, I was saying to myself that I should avoid this because I don't know how to encapsulate this in a short amount of time, but I think I'm going to have to, so I'll just do my best to be brief with this, because I better be honest about this. Otherwise, if I didn't, sort of say that I fundamentally disagree, it would be dishonest of me. I've had problems since the time that I could, walk or talk or think, with authority, with people telling me what to do. First of all, with my parents, and then secondly, with teachers, and then religious orders, and of course there is some uh, intersection or confluence between all of those different groups. I at minimum, wanted them to explain to me why they knew better than I did, and who are they to tell me? And if we're all human and we're all born equal, is it that they are older? And I wanted to know what the rules are. And you see, straight away, they are reluctant to even say, well, when somebody's older than somebody else, they get to tell them what to do, because of course it doesn't work that way. And then they'd have to admit that just because somebody's older than them, that they know better and can tell them what to do. And then I gotta go, well, what is it then? What's the order? Is it priest, teacher, parent, or parent, teacher, and whatever? You understand? There's problems, and people never want to set down the rules. Now, the other big thing, and by the way, I think it's a good quality, but of course, everything with a balance. I am aware that the foreword to Rules for Radicals is dedicated by Saul Alinsky to Lucifer, the first great rebel. I'm not trying to say I'm like that, but there is something to be said for that, right? So again, I'm not hard and fast, but what I am hard and fast on is, and I still haven't changed, right? Even though it would be practical to have religion controlling the masses so that they're not just doing whatever at the moment. I still do have massive problems with the idea that somebody who needs to be told what to do and then does it out of either obedience or avarice because he wants to get some reward for being good, or he's afraid of being punished if he isn't being good. That's not morality. I am categorical about that. Just because somebody, and I don't think you're like this, just to be clear, and a lot of other people aren't, but I am sure that the great masses out there only do good because they are afraid of being punished if they don't. Like, let's imagine hell, right? They're afraid they'll go to hell if they don't. That's the traditional way, and then they are greedy and self-serving, and they want to be rewarded in heaven if they just store up all their good points, their brownie points. And to me, that is not somebody who has a moral framework. That is somebody who's just self-interested. That's it. And where we are in a society right now, and I'll hand this over to you now, is that people are too stupid to even act in their own self-interest, and we're just trying to get to that minimum bottom rung where we're trying to say to people, please just, if you have a nation, act in your own self-interest. Could we even just get you to do that? And the answer to that is no. So that's why I'm not feeling so charitable to any of these people, and I don't know how I could ever, because I can't square that circle. Can you, JC, please?
Well, it's possible, I suppose, like considering, you sound just like me probably 15, 20 years ago. Maybe even like less time than that. It's kind of hard to decide, really when like my heart changed. But, the thing is, when it like, some of the problems that you laid out there, those are very much Western issues. Like when it comes to like why you should listen to someone, for instance, in Orthodoxy, like we have a very, like a very clear, groundwork for, the reason we listen to the church fathers is because they are, remember that lineage I told you about? Well, there is a lineage from Christ to the apostles, and from those apostles to the successors that they chose. So, it's just like you would have, you might have Bruce Lee. Well, Bruce Lee was a student of Ip Man, and Ip Man was a student of someone else. And the way you know that Bruce Lee is a master of that martial art is because he is in that lineage. He did learn from the person he was supposed to have learned it from. And then when he performs it just as the person before him did, and the person before that, and the person before that. You see, it's just like a chain of custody when you're talking about almost anything else in the world that you want to verify. If you want to verify a piece of art is real, how would you go about doing that? You know what I'm saying? And when it comes to like the hierarchy in heaven is laid out. You have God at the top, then you have Christ. Mary sits at his right hand. John the Baptist sits at the other. You have the hierarchy of angels, as above, so below. You have, in a way, not like the esoteric meaning, but in the way that you have God in heaven, you have Christ, you have the church, and then you have the church fathers. In the household, you have, father, mother, children, And in the government, you have the king, who also acts as a representation of the Father. These things are mimicking, they're mimicking the hierarchy of heaven, which is, it's designed to keep order. Now, look, let's see. I don't want to lose everything. You made a lot of points, and it's hard to catch up with all of them there. But either way, I do understand what you're saying, because I felt very much the same way at one point in time in my life. I've always hated being told what to do. I've absolutely hated it. My wife is the same way. She has always hated being told what to do, and to some degree, I still do. It's not that like I've, become some new person that has like none of the problems that I ever used to have. No, it's a daily fight. Not for me to get brownie points, because like, I do want to go to heaven, but that's not the reason I do what I do. The reason I do what I do is because I choose myself to be a better person. And I myself like have seen, through studying philosophy and the way life is, that orthodoxy is the truth, capital T truth. Christ is truth. Truth is a who, not a what. And it's absolutely necessary, for more reasons than just going to heaven. Without that order, everything becomes impossible to like even accomplish. The possibility of even knowing things without Christ is almost impossible. You must have Christ and the Godhead to be able to really get to the source of knowledge, because without that, you can't justify anything. You can say all these things, but when it comes down to it and you get back to justification, that's the problem that the atheists and the nihilists and the people that subscribe to scientism and all these other like cults that you see running around today. That's the problem they're always going to have, is when it comes down to justification. There is no justification for the way they believe, so that's why they wind up in nihilism and in a dead end, and wanting to suicide themselves, because like their possibilities have all possibilities have ended for them. Their philosophy has hit a dead end. Do you see what I'm saying, John?
Oh yeah. Now, and I want to make it clear that when I was saying that somebody who follows the commandments, the Ten Commandments, or any other rules of their religion, um, I'm not saying that they're a bad person. Certainly not saying that you're a bad person.
Well, no.
I'm not even, I'm not saying I'm morally superior. But what I am saying is that I think that we're actually saying the same thing. But maybe, obviously, we're saying it in slightly different ways. One of the things is that you mentioned the word justification there. And so that's what I mean by saying, explain to me why. Like, that's exactly the same thing. Justify the statement or the assertion or the rule that you have asked me to agree to.
Absolutely.
That's what I mean. So when a child says, but why must I? Who says, right? And who
Mhm.
says is another way of saying why, but it's another way of kind of being more direct with the question of saying, actually, point me to the person from whom this authority comes, which you are claiming flows through you in a hierarchy, that I am underneath you and you are underneath this other person. Who gives you the authority? And those are perfect, in fact, not just legitimate questions, they're necessary questions, without which a hierarchy couldn't work, let alone a moral framework.
Absolutely.
And so the person at the top must justify why he is either the top of the chain or the foundation of everything. And so it must be
Absolutely.
self-evident why it is that whatever he says is self-evidently true. And if he's going to say that he's infallible and whatever. And I want to as well take issue with the idea then that, okay, well, God flows through the church and the church has the representative and then it goes through the family and that kind of thing, because, well, a lot of reasons. But first of all, maybe I'll say that we all know that there was plenty of very evil priests.
Yes.
And even by the 90s, it was extremely clear to me that it was matter of public record that they had absolutely no moral authority to tell anybody what to do at all in their lives whatsoever.
Mhm.
Um, Now, maybe you're talking hypothetically and sort of say, oh, yes, but I mean, in an ideal scenario, that's how the hierarchy would work, but it already failed. So, in my mind, I don't see how it could revert back to that original way of keeping control. And then my question would be, even if it did, so we have a working hierarchy, and then we have order. In other words, we have control over people who otherwise would be creating chaos and would not be well behaved, because I expect people to just behave themselves just because they're autonomous human beings. But that leads me into free will and freedom. So there's always going to be a balance between order and freedom.
Yes.
And so, how do we arrive at that balance? How do we strike the balance? Because I want to be free. I reject the idea that any other human being, maybe there's a God, but even that, I reserve the right to reject any God, even if he created me to tell me what to do. So, I mean, if people want
God,
to say, "Oh, then I'm like Lucifer," and it's not a pride thing. It's just explain to me why, justify why, even if you created me, I have to do what you tell me. Because parents used to say, and maybe sorry, I'll hand it off to you now in a second, but parents used to say, I brought you into this world and I can take you out. And maybe some societies would think that's okay. A mother can kill her child even if after it's born. If imagine it's a polar bear, can only look after one cub. It's fine to kill one so the other survives. There's all these kind of relative moralities going on, but we as human beings think we are elevated above all the animals because we have a higher mindedness, and that means a higher consciousness and higher ability to know inherently what's right or wrong. So my kind of question is, if I can kind of bring it back around now a bit, is we expect more of ourselves. I don't think it's like I think if we actually got some hierarchy working again, that's what I already was dissatisfied with. I wouldn't accept that. So again, okay, if we have bad parents, and a lot of parents are bad, then no, you absolutely should not honor thy father and thy mother if they're physically abusing you, mentally torturing you, all these kind of things. The right of the individual, even though they're younger, should absolutely say, I reject what my parents are telling me to do. I will not do what my parents are telling me to do. And I don't want to get into all the nasty things they could do. But so that could easily turn around its head and say, well, there goes your hierarchy out the window. So how do you square all those circles, please, JC? Off you go.
Well, first off, people like this is a really common argument. It's an argument I made back, before I had converted to Orthodoxy against it. Actually, I became Orthodox trying to argue against it, which is ironic at the least. But this is a really common problem people have. It's just like the question of, if God good, why evil? The thing is, we are fallen creatures. Because of the fall, all human beings have the ability to be corrupted. This is why we cannot have a pope being supreme. See, in the Orthodox world, it is decentralized. Each bishop is equal. Yes, in the original church, it called Peter the first among equals, but still, that's first among equals. All bishops are meant to be equal. Yes, there's technically a leader, but he never has absolute power. And if a leader does something he's not supposed to do, then you remove him and replace him with somebody else. It's we don't do the things that the Roman Catholic Church does. We don't say that, oh, you can't have the Bible in your language. We don't say, oh, well, the church is always right, so it doesn't matter if he did something wrong or not. We don't do those things. But the problem being is that human hearts are corrupted. And no matter what organization it is, doesn't matter if it's the church, it doesn't matter if it's a household or a business or society at large, you're going to have individuals that fall sometimes. It's just part of being human. And when they do fall, you have to punish them. But just because, humans are fallible and make mistakes, that doesn't have any bearing on whether or not the teachings of the church are true when followed like they are supposed to be. That would be a logical fallacy hinging one on the other. Like it just doesn't quite, it doesn't follow. That would be my answer to that one, John. Like, does that make any sense?
Well, JC, already I am sort of again going to have to do some nitpicking, So look, you said, all right, obviously men are fallible and, men are corruptible. And so if they're either incorrect or if they're wrong, right, my question obviously would be, it does beg the question, right? You said like they must be removed. By whom? Who has the authority to do that if we already have a chain of command, right? With people who have status above and below people. Is it only the people above him who could remove the corrupted ones?
No, like this is the church is a living body made of all of us, and all of us have a say. If he's doing something he's not supposed to, we send the word up the chain and it's dealt with. Yes, there's a hierarchy and an in place of how to deal with that. Yes, his superiors would be the ones who actually defrock him, but his superiors would be defrocking him on the vote of the see itself. The people themselves have a say on whether or not that priest gets to be their priest. It's one of those things that's why like everything is decentralized, so that one corrupt bishop can't bring down the entire church, like you're seeing in Rome. This is the problem that Rome has. The Pope, I don't think anybody like that's non-Catholic, a Roman Catholic, would disagree. Even most Roman Catholics would agree with me in saying that Francis is an absolute heretic and a plague upon the Roman Catholic Church. Honestly, he's the best thing that ever happened to Orthodoxy, because he has sent so many converts, running and screaming from Rome and into Orthodoxy. It's crazy. But either way, that's the reason for the decentralization. And the Orthodox Church is a much more democratic system. I guess I hate using that word because democracy these days is a farce, etc. But it's going to, like, the people are going to have much more say in what happens in Orthodoxy rather than what people got used to seeing from Rome.
Well, of course, and I will remind myself and anybody listening is that you did indeed say the last time that, and I think you said, of course, as well, that you're going to be arguing, but not necessarily arguing, but for the point of view of discussion, you'll be speaking from the point of view or perspective of one who is extolling the virtues and better merits of the Orthodox, not just system, but structure and hierarchy. That's yeah. And of course, from my perspective, when I was saying about like, what if the church is corrupt and blah, 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 of course, I thought it went without saying, but I should have actually said it. I was imagining the Catholic Church with Pope Francis, as you said, at the helm of it. But let me just say this then, right? Just to kind of get slightly into the history of the whole thing. And of course, it started with Peter. There are people who say, well, the church became corrupt at some point. Because I know there was people who said that Pope John Paul II was a very holy man, very lovely, very kind, all this kind of thing. I don't know. I didn't look inside his mind. And given what I've learned about everything, I'm not going to just take it as read that he was, or that it wasn't just the media telling us that he was. And I think I read about the guy that tried to shoot him, and or may at least shot him, but his bulletproof glass and his Pope-mobile rescued him or saved him.
That's what you say about that.
Oh, you've something to tell us about that. Well, I'm not so sure that that's all so black and white, cut and dried. Although I do remember reading an article that said that the Pope met him later when he was in prison and forgave him and blah, blah, blah. But let me say this, even if Pope John Paul II was good, in inverted commas, that Pope Innocent III was the fella who I mentioned in our live stream there recently, or in my live stream there, but you were in the chat. He was a fella who sent some Templars up to murder all the Cathars, and then somebody said to him, well, listen, how are we going to know which are Cathars and which are actually your faithful Catholic servants? And he went, doesn't matter, send them all to God and let him sort them out. Or at least a monk under his employ did it so that his hands would be clean and he could retain the title of Pope Innocent. I did nothing. It was just my underling. Didn't know what he did, plausible deniability. So that's in the Middle Ages. And you kind of think, okay, well, when exactly did the church get corrupted? And then I say to myself, well, it was always a failed institution to put it mildly, from the get-go, because I don't believe that Jesus said to Peter, "Tell you what, listen, you betrayed me. You told the Roman soldiers you didn't even ever heard of me. You're the best person to lay a solid foundation on." He's the last person you'd lay a solid foundation on. So I'm saying that whole church structure was corrupt from the get-go. I was born nearly 2,000 years later. So even at the tender age of 2 years old, when I could walk and talk and waddle around, I was absolutely right in my instincts to sort of say, all of you guys who are telling me that every one of you are above me in a chain of command, and you can all tell me what to do and where to go and when to stand, when to sit up, when to kneel, when to say my prayers, when to eat my meals, all this sort of stuff, when to get up, when to go to bed. Why? Just one of you explain to me why, and none of them ever did. And I know the reason why they didn't, because none of them ever could. And it was eventually like people would just say, like my parents, like, but my parents were generally good. And my mom would say to me, because I said so, right? There's no discussion to be had. It's just because I said so, right? And they had obviously physical power over you and the power to send you to your room or punish you by removing toys or just, give you a slap with a wooden spoon. And I accepted that it was all because they had my long-term best interests at heart. But I'm going to say that I don't know enough about the Orthodox Church, and I'm going to, take it for the sake of argument or discussion that you have indeed found the perfect hierarchy and system. But I don't believe it, and I don't believe there's any religion out there, because there are ideas that are good, but they must come from inside. That would be my general philosophy. People must realize these things autonomously. And as soon as men get in control of any hierarchy, they're going to say, good, I'm now in charge, and they have a bit of power, and we know what happens when you get a bit of power and a bit more. So I'll hand it off to you now and ask you maybe this question. If there are people under a bishop who have a say, as you said, they've got a say in who is their bishop, who has authority over them, and they can sort of go around him to the manager above him, the archbishop above him, and sort of say, we need to get rid of this guy because he's corrupt. Well, what if the archbishop says, no, he's good, he's staying where he is, and you're all just going to have to live underneath him and keep quiet and grumble so quietly that we can't hear you. Otherwise, we'll send some Templars and sort you out. You see what I'm getting at? How do you so if it's is it a democracy or is it not, or is it a benevolent dictatorship? How do we square all those circles again, please, JC?
Well, see, again, this is where you're going to come into like the corrupted human heart, and this has happened before. This is why the church is decentralized again. If that happens, then you go this is where you're knowing the teachings of Christ come in. This is where knowing philosophy and what you're supposed to do and what that priest is supposed to be doing and saying comes in. You are supposed to take, if you're the head of the household, you're supposed to know this stuff well enough to where if that priest is not teaching like he's supposed to, if he's not behaving like he's supposed to, and you send a complaint and nothing happens, you can go to a different parish. You can go to a different church. If the church is set up in such a way that even if there's just only one bishop, even if there's just one, that it will not fall. That church will be contained within just that church. Think of it as a living body, and when things go rotten, you cut them off. This is how Rome wound up separate from the one true church in the first place. Rome, around the 1050s AD, decided that it wanted certain things that Christ never laid down. It wanted to make changes and make their pope supreme, make their bishop, infallible and all these different things. And they were excommunicated. It's that's where that whole schism thing came in. Once you've went into heresy and apostasy, the church will eject you. Whether you're a bishop or not. And, what kind of happened is Rome just kind of went on behaving as if. But in this fallen world, there's no way to safeguard and make sure that, these kind of things are never going to happen. There's no system that is perfect. I don't care, because this world has fallen, yes, the system that Christ gave us may be perfect, but man will never be perfect. We will always be flawed, and because that, we will always make mistakes when trying to do this. But that doesn't mean that it's still not the best option there is, because it's the only option for us actually to repent, become better, and make it into the eternal. It's the only way forward. I came to that conclusion because I've tried everything else and nothing else worked. I was in a sad state. But as you say, this has to happen within the hearts of each and every person. Like you're like, in order for you to believe it, you would have to go and actually start to learn it, take part in a liturgy, and actually go through the experience. For some people it works to hear somebody like me, which I will go ahead and say I am not going to be the best apologist out there. I'm not a professional apologist. Jay Dyer or somebody like that would be Father Deacon Ananias. Either of those would be far better than me at this. But that said, listening to one of us might move the needle for some people. But for certain people, like you sound very much like me. You're going to have to go out there and you would have to actually experience these things and go through them for that needle to ever be really truly moved for you. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I actually do want to get some, maybe ask you what exactly you mean, but by moving the needle, right? But I'll leave that just for a moment. Just want to just kind of pause that question for a moment, but leave it hanging there, because what I do kind of want to say to you is that I sort of expected to have to ask you a few more questions before hearing you say, well, okay, fine, the church isn't perfect. Because you see, that's how it goes, right? Once the church isn't perfect, once any structure isn't perfect, and it's never going to be, because as you say, it's made up of human beings, and human beings are certainly not perfect. Um, and in fact, like I would sort of say, like the reason why our societies are able to be taken advantage of is because you can predict with extreme um, extremely high probability what people will do, because you can always guarantee that people are going to do the wrong thing given the choice. They're going to do something that is self-serving and will be very something that won't even turn out to their own benefit in anything more than other than just the very short term. So this is how all these secret societies and other people who just want to be in control of the general masses can control people by their own vices and the predictability of their vices and their predilections and peccadillos. But before getting onto that, which is another thing, I sort of just want to say, look, it sounded to me a lot when you were talking about if this part of the structure is broken, then we can fix it this way. And that's what happened with the church. The priority was always to prevent the church from falling, to protect the integrity of the institution, to maintain the structural control, right? It wasn't about how do we maintain the happiness, well-being, spiritual health of our people. Those weren't priorities at all. The priority was always to maintaining the structure of their institution, which is why when a priest would transgress, and I'll use that word very as a great euphemism to cover all manner of sins, they would simply move the priests elsewhere. And you can only move your priests to all these different parishes until it becomes just, can we swap this real bad guy, and again, it's a euphemism to hide multitude of sins, for this other real bad guy. So you're just swapping, a different shell of a person for all the demons that you're transferring from one location to another. The whole system was rotten from top to bottom, and in the basement, as I think we both know, there was plenty of little bodies there too. So I do need to sort of be clear about what I'm saying. Now, look, again, I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, you're saying that the Orthodox Church is not going to be corrupted this way, or isn't, and there's a good system. There's a perfect system for fixing any broken parts that occur with it, but I don't believe that, and I'm just sort of saying that, like, and maybe you'll agree with me that it cannot be. We cannot allow ourselves to believe that man can create a perfect system. So now
And
here
yeah,
I've got it. Okay, I better let you answer a few of those, and as well, what do you mean by something will move the needle for me or somebody else who might be listening and be sort of saying, okay, he's making some good points. I'm not sure where I land. Nobody has to land, by the way, on anything. Make up your own mind without even being influenced by this. But if something resonates, they might sort of say, yeah, I'm all confused now. Can you? Well, I suppose let's start with, can you maybe define a bit more what you mean by moving the needle? I think it's something from your past experience. What happened to you, if you want to talk about your personal experience, and then that whole church structure thing. Cheers, JC.
well, it's one of those things that, like I was saying before, for some people, like specifically people that already are, like, for instance, if you're already Roman Catholic, if you already are part of the Roman Catholic system, and you've seen all the corruption and everything, but you've had the basic teachings of philosophy and all these kind of things, you have that foundation, then possibly, like, which has already happened many times, but the thing is, you might be moved by something that I say or Jay says, an argument that we make, right? Now, if you're somebody who doesn't have a formal education in philosophy, you've not been part of an actual church, because, Western churches, Baptists, Protestants, and all these different things, most of them don't have, like, they don't have that tradition. They don't have the philosophy and the oral tradition. So trying to have a debate with them, like, they don't even have a framework. They don't even have the terms. Like, for instance, I could, telling them, they're in prelest or something. They don't even know what prelest is. You know what I'm saying? They're like, in order for an argument to move somebody, they have to actually understand what you're talking about. They have to have some kind of framework for it. And for people outside the church that's never, like, been to liturgy, that's never experienced the stuff, like actually experienced it firsthand, and like, they don't have the philosophy, like, to gird them, it's going to be really difficult for some apologists to actually, to get them to understand, because really a lot of it comes down to an understanding. And like, it's really hard to impart that understanding when you don't have the foundations. Do you see what I mean?
Well, can I be perfectly upfront and honest with you and say two things here? First of all, even though you've said the Orthodox Church, and I've said it too, better just let people know, if in case they didn't listen to the last conversation we had, is that it's the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Isn't that what it's called?
Yes. And that there's a specific reason for that. When Rome split in 1054 AD, you had Rome, and then you had Byzantium. Rome is the throne of Peter. Byzantium is the throne of Paul, which Rome technically isn't the only throne of Peter. See, that, like, the throne of Peter is divided into three originally. There were three bishops that sat, like, over those districts, and with the split they got consolidated into one, but that's another story altogether. But anyway, when like, the last crusade that Rome endeavored on was actually against the Orthodox Church and Byzantium. Like, Roman Catholics came over, Templars came over, and went to war with Byzantium and murdered actual Christians from the original church, trying to take over the whole thing, you see, and overthrow the East. Well, when Byzantium eventually did fall to, I do believe it was the Ottomans. I think they fell in 14. It's like 14, the end of the 1400s. I can't remember the exact date right off the top of my head right now for some reason. But anyway, like, the queen took everybody and went to Russia. That's where she fled to. That's where the Orthodox Church was taken to, was to Russia. That's where we were, like, the church was given sanctuary. And that's why it's still, like, that's why the throne of Paul is still there rather than in Byzantium, the original Eastern Roman Empire. Does that make sense?
Well, I tell you what, that is fascinating, and I'm just going to quickly reiterate what. No, I tell you what I'll do. No, I will reiterate what you said there. So, as I said, anyway, look, as far as I knew from being a Catholic or growing up in the Catholic, I'll say indoctrination, or that's the way the society was around me. But I maintained and retained my own individualism, for good or bad. And I think that it's a good thing that I did, but other people are free to disagree. But what I didn't know is that Byzantium, or Constantinople, or Istanbul as it's known now, is was founded by Paul. And when you said to me that Rome sent over Templars, I'm thinking, of course, right? Like that Turk, Cenk Uygur, of course, right? Because Rome didn't want any competition. Everybody would look at their rivals and say, if I can get rid of him, I won't have to worry anymore about people pointing to me and saying, oh, are you really as good as the other guy? I think I'll go with the other guy. Because to me, it's all just a competition for
Yeah.
who gets to be in control of the flock. And they
It's
don't
kind
want
of
to
like
split.
Oreo cookies. Y'all, I do believe y'all invented the original Oreo cookie, like that was called something else, and then it was stolen, and the knockoff cookie ended up becoming like the most popular one here in the West. Well, like it was kind of like that. Yeah, that's what they were trying to do.
Well, the other thing then is that, look, I'd heard of the Ottomans. As far as I know, they were Turks, but maybe that's kind of just a wrong way of looking back at history through the modern lens. I don't know. But I couldn't have said that it was in the 1400s, but I'm not sure that the specific date matters, but it probably does if you're a historian. What I did not know, and I find it fascinating, is that you're saying the Queen took everyone and went to Russia, and that's how it was the origination of what we call Russian Orthodox. Can I ask you, which queen was it, and where did she come from?
Oh Lord.
Oh, well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot
I
now.
don't
It's
have.
just if you know.
Hold on 1 second, and I will tell you.
It sounds like a book. Don't press any buttons on your phone just in case. I don't want to get you cut off, It sounds like you're reading a book, JC, and so I'm hoping
Yeah,
you've
I
got
have
this
to
big
like. Just,
leather-bound Masonic Bible. Is that what
yeah,
it
you're
is?
all good.
Well, look,
We
while
don't
you're
have
looking up,
that.
yeah.
It was Sophia of Russia. Yes, like
Wow.
I do believe.
Yeah. Well, Sophia
Like
is Greek for
yeah,
wisdom, isn't that right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
did she
She
come from
ruled from
Greece,
1448 to 1503.
inside the borders of what we now know as Russia? Is it?
Well, it was in Byzantium at first, and then they went to Russia.
So Byzantium was in the Russian Empire.
Yeah, she ended up being the second wife of Ivan III, the Grand Prince of Moscow.
Okay. Okay. So she went off and married him. I mean, I'm thinking of the game of chess. No wonder the Masons, look at the checkered board and they see everything kings and queens moving around, castling, all this sort of stuff. It's just a big grand chessboard.
Well,
But
everybody's related.
yeah. Well, look, before I suppose complicating that, can I just get it clear? So Rome fell to the Ottomans, or are you saying Byzantium did?
Yes, the city
Byzantium.
anyway, like the territory did, but the church itself and the empire relocated.
So it was the queen from Byzantium who fled to Russia rather than from Rome, was it?
Yes, Byzantium became Rome. Byzantium itself is also Rome. It's not what in the modern world we call Rome, but it was still Rome. See, back then, the East and the West were both Rome. So technically, Byzantium was still Rome. It's technically Byzantium is still the actual Rome, and the Pope and all them are just play acting.
Right. Well,
They,
look, here's what I think I know then, right? Because I think we might be confusing. You're sort of saying Rome in spirit, but there is a Rome in Italy, and there was a
yeah.
pope sitting there, but he was a copycat, or he was, let's say, like the would-be pretender. And it makes sense then. Like, so I'm just going to say again, here's what I think I know: that Constantinople, or Byzantium, is the city in modern-day Turkey that's known as Istanbul. And it's literally on a bridge between, sort of Asia or Asia Minor or whatever, Middle East and Europe now. And so I could see that at one point it would have been in what was the greater Russian Empire, and it's pretty close, well, a lot closer than a lot of other things in Europe to Russia. So it makes sense that you'd go from there to Moscow or Leningrad, or sorry, St. Petersburg, I should say. That makes more sense if they would go to St. Petersburg, right? If he's the Archangel Peter there.
Where you have family, and there's always been a connection between Russia and, like, you have the Varangian Guard, for instance. Varangian Guard, the axe-wielding foreigners, the Byzantine people called them. And basically what they were Rus people, basically Vikings, descendants of Rurik the Viking, who founded the Russian, nation or whatever. And, these guys came over with their big Dane axes and everything and fought for the Eastern Empire. So, there's always been a connection, almost always been a connection between the Rus Empire and the Byzantine Empire, like through the church and through bloodline connections, you see.
Right. I mean, the whole Rus thing is it's very obvious to a lot of people maybe, but I mean, it took me a while to twig that Rus is Roth, is Rosso in Italian, and it all means red. And also there was a pirate called Barbarossa, and a barb, or a barber is somebody who shaves your beard. So a barb is your beard, and Rosso is red. So there was a pirate called Redbeard. And a lot of these, I don't know if they were Goths, or I don't know if they were the Vandals or other Germanic type tribes, or someone from the north. And then of course there's Vikings and Norsemen, and
they're all related anyway. Like all Indo-European peoples come from like one people group, and then they split off some way back into the early Bronze Age or Stone Age. You know what I mean? Like the late Chalcolithic or whatever. Like they started to diverge into different tribes. So, I think, what's the name of them? The starts with an S. Why can I not think of it right now?
And it's a group of people.
Yeah, it's a group of basically horse warriors with spears. That's where you get the term German from in the first place. German means spearman.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. I wonder what is the S then? But it could be Spearman. I don't know. Yeah, Spearman goes to German.
Yeah, that's what it means. It quite literally means spearmen.
It only takes a mild different pronunciation or transliteration to change Spearman to German.
Yes.
But look, I suppose getting back on track. Oh, I just wanted to say then as well, as far as the geography of it and the name Paul, right? So I'm taking it that Paul was the guy, Saul, who had the change of heart on the road to Damascus. Is that the guy?
Yes, I do believe.
Right. And so he would have come up from the Holy Land there, whatever is Israel and Lebanon area, that whole Galilean area there, or Nazarethian area. I don't know if that's an adjective, but I keep trying to make it be one. And he did make a journey, didn't he? It's part of biblical history that he made a journey going up through Assyria and into what we now call Turkey, although the border there is likely not exactly what we think, but I know there's a natural sort of bottom middle tip of what we now know as Turkey that goes into, I think, Syria. And you can sort of see, oh yeah, well, it would be a border because you kind of have to cross over a very narrow spit of land. And then you can see how, look, if Christianity did indeed start, and it seems like it did from the geography, Christianity, if it started in that Sea of Galilee area, it would naturally come up that way. But I know that there's a fellow who I respect, and I guess here's how I'm going to make a question out of it. And I'm going to ask if you watch this guy. If you don't, you should. I'm recommending to you and anybody else out there. And his username on YouTube is Roy Potter QA, and he's very informed of all this stuff, and he's written books on it. But he's just great to listen to in general. But he says that he has big problems with what he calls Pauline Christianity, And I wonder if there's any distinction to be made then between Byzantium and the Russian Orthodox Church, or is there some differentiation to be made there? Do you watch
Well,
any? Can you square any of those circles there? Why you might have a problem?
I'm not familiar with him, and like I can think of me. It depends on exactly what sect of Christianity or what religion he's following, on exactly what his problems may be. Though, I mean, I have problems with certain branches of the Orthodox Church because, like, the Orthodox Church has its own problems. Like, we have a heretic right now sitting in the Ukraine who is teamed up with a bunch of, Azov, Nazis's, funny mustache men people, waging a proxy war. So, yeah, like I have problem with certain branches, like, not all people who call themselves Orthodox are technically Orthodox. That
Well,
is,
yeah. I thought for a moment you were talking about the Russian guy, but look, to me, I mean, I would have no problems leaving the Ukraine out of this discussion entirely. And I don't know if there's any good world leaders, but I certainly wouldn't. I mean, I've seen footage of him in some kind of weird disco as well. It's just highly odd. And I know that he did some variety entertainment show where he was playing the piano with his nether regions, which is just. I mean, I don't see there's that much funny with it. It's a bit crass. I'm certainly not a prude, but I just kind of think like, I think I'd like society to have higher standards in their entertainment. But just to answer your question there about this fella, I will recommend him to anybody who doesn't know it, because it's not necessarily a religious thing. He sometimes does religious stuff, but to me, like, he's an ex-army guy. I think he was a lieutenant colonel, but maybe I'm demoting him there. He could have been a colonel, but he didn't go any further in his rank because he essentially would question authority all the time, and all of his authority, and I totally believe it, were corrupt in the United States Army.
yes.
And yeah, and it's not, and I'm not trying to needle you here, but like, obviously, as disgruntled as many people are, there doesn't seem to be any mechanism where we go, oh, excuse me, Mr. President, all of the army above the rank of colonel are corrupt. Can you just get rid of them all and put some good guys in there? As if that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But just to answer your question, pardon?
I said the president couldn't do that if he wanted to.
I know. The structure isn't there, but the will isn't there, even if it was.
Exactly.
But just to answer your question, he is an ex-Mormon. Now, that might send people's backs up a bit, but I would encourage people to give this guy a lot of benefit of the doubt. I can't say I'm a perfect good judge of character, but I know that he's been consistent over the years, and you can watch his back catalogue.
Just
so that
just because he's not, the same religion as me doesn't mean I'm not like one of these Western cultists who are going to be like, oh, well, you're not like me. You don't believe every single thing I do. Therefore, you are a horrible person. Obviously, like, you're my friend. I would consider you my friend at this point. Like, you obviously don't hold all the same beliefs as me, but we get along fine, right? But as far as Mormons go,
JC, I don't want to leave you hanging there. Okay, I was going to let you carry on in case you wanted to get a thought out, but I do want to say, look, I really appreciate that, and thank you. And I'm so delighted that not only can we disagree, but remain friends. I really like that. It's such a rare thing, and that means a heck of a lot to me. And I'm very honored, and I would like to say yes. I hope that we continue to be friends and have many more productive conversations.
awesome.
So thanks. Continue on.
Awesome. I'll say, like, I'm very grateful for this, like, friendship myself. Like, it has been very productive as far as I'm concerned thus far, and I do hope it goes on. But yes, let's see. Where was I at? Where was I at there, John?
Well, I'm sorry, and I kind of cut you off there because I didn't want to leave you hanging. But I was talking about this Mormon fella, and you were saying how,
Yes.
just because somebody's a different religion doesn't mean I'm gonna immediately say, well, you're my enemy. But unfortunately, as you know, a lot of people in the world do that. They may have knee-jerk reflex reactions.
And a lot of his friction probably does come from his Mormon upbringing, though. And I mean, being as I'm part Native American, like, I have my own issues with Mormonism because of, like, you know, they make a lot of claims, including my people, that aren't true. You know, their founder kind of took some liberties with some of his beliefs that weren't really founded in, like, the actual history of Native American people, etc.
Oh,
But
are you saying the Mormons say a lot of untrue things about Native Americans?
yes, Native Americans are included in their history. A lot of Mormons say that Native Americans are like a lost tribe of Jews.
I see. I didn't
And
know that they said that. Yeah.
yeah, he says that spirit appeared to him. He found and led him to some golden discs here in America, and those golden discs were, you know, left by Jews who left and came here, and, you know, all this other kind of stuff. And, you know, it's, you know, I like, you know, I don't want to get too far into it and, you know, get into all this, like, you know, because it can easily devolve into a race thing and all this other kind of this oppression stuff. And it's a really, you know, Native Americans and all that kind of stuff is a touchy subject around here. So, you know, just being careful. But yes,
Yeah,
around
for sure. Yeah.
that. Yeah. But
Well, yeah.
I'm tacitly familiar with Mormonism. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just I have to mention it that South Park did, and it's probably 10 years ago now, but however long ago it was, they did a really funny and I think truthful and on the nose, in fact, very accurate, not just truthful, but accurate is probably the best word, um, satirical depiction of the beliefs of the Mormons. And you think it's a joke, but they actually flash up on screen a lot of the time, just like they did with Scientology. They flash up on screen. This is not a joke. This is actually what the Mormons believe, in the same way as they did with the Scientologists.
Yeah.
But they kind of stopped short of a couple of other religions. But anyway, right, I won't go there. But one of the things is, I don't know if you've seen it, but just to explain in case anybody didn't see it, they have this music that has this sort of drum beat that goes dum 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 dum, and it's designed to be sort of you know, onomatopoeic like that. And the idea is that it stretches credulity so thin that you really would have to be not at the races at all to believe that every time you want to do something or have a question, or the community wants to do this, and this guy says, well, I need to be in control of that, and they'll say, but why? And you say, well, God says so. And they'll say, really? Where does it say that in any of our templates and commandments? And he goes, oh, well, I'm getting a message. I think God needs to talk to me, but I have to go out into the woods, and he's telling me there's a plate I can dig up somewhere. It's going to have commandments, new commandments on it, because God has been changing his mind every time these new situations come up. And he goes into the woods and he happens to find these new commandments, and they say, all right, where's this new sort of golden template with all this rules on it? And he goes, oh, I left it in the forest. No, but I remembered what it says, and I'll get someone to write it down. I mean, all of that at every stage is patent nonsense, but their conclusion is that, look, obviously all of this is nonsense on the face of it, but so many Mormons are just kind of generally decent people. They seem to work fine in society. So the attitude has been, let's just leave sleeping dogs lie. But my attitude would be, you do that long enough, and eventually you'll find out what the problems underneath the surface are. So what do you
Yes.
think there?
I would agree with you there. That would be, you know, basically my outlook on it, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, I feel orthodoxy is the truth. Just because, you know, I tried a lot of these other religions, most of them really. I went through their philosophy and, you know, tried to square that circle, as you say, which is a Masonic term, by the way. You know, and it just didn't work. You know, when you start contradicting yourself, when these other, like, faiths don't really adhere to the law of non-contradiction so much and things like that, you know, it just comes down to, it can't be true because it contradicts itself. But Mormonism itself is framed after Masonry. Most people don't realize that, but if you just really look at their temples and things like that, you'll start to see it.
Aha. Well, I think I had heard that before about their temples, but I had forgotten it. I certainly didn't realize it by looking too much into it. And to be honest, like I was never interested in religion anyway, because I knew that I didn't want my own one to be shackling, the one that I was born into but always rejected. I didn't want the shackles of that. So I certainly wasn't going to start looking in all these other places for just, oh, I just need something that's slightly different to tell me what to do. My basic uh, objection is I'm not looking for somebody to tell me what to do. I feel that if I'm an adult, then I'm capable of making my own decisions. Thank you very much. Right? I don't need some other human being going, now I'll be in control of you, But I know you see things differently. As far as the Mormons being like a modern offshoot of the sorry, what the Masons, rather. I was going to say Templars. That it fits. It makes sense because it's just somebody else who finds new territory and saying, "Hey, listen, I could take orders from head office, or I could set up my own franchise." Tee hee hee. That's basically
Well,
what it is. Then.
what a lot of people don't realize is when you start getting higher up in masonry, like, well, I mean, you got to think if your god is Lucifer, what does Luciferianism teach? Luciferianism teaches that who is God? You are God, right? Well, it would only follow that a true master of the occult would bow to no one but themselves, correct? So
Yes.
therefore, if you're a true master, what would you then do? You would go out and create your own that you're the head of, right? Why would you remain part? Like, look at what Aleister Crowley did. He had been a mason and all kinds of different things, but what did he finally end up doing? He went out and started his own cult, didn't he? He started the OTO. Okay, you have somebody like the guy who, I know his name, but I don't want to really say it. The guy who played in that Morbius movie, like he started his own cult, and he was doing things on the red carpet, like, carrying a fake head and doing a lot of Masonic stuff, and this is one of those things, like if you truly like understand and you're truly a master, then you're not going to be part of any group that you're not the head of.
Yeah, I mean the logic is impeccable. If supposing, and I'm not, somebody asked me in the last stream, I think, am I a Mason? And I was using the can you square that circle phrase, as a bit of a nudge and wink. But I'm not a Mason, never was, and I never will be. But I think it's fun to maybe sort of use a little phrase. It's like a pun, but you sort of the pun is
Well,
intended. Do you know what I mean? But it's a nice phrase. It's a way of putting it. Everybody
everybody
knows what I mean.
uses, everybody uses Masonic things all the time. If you like to watch baseball or play golf, you're engaging in a Masonic activity. Like,
Oh, can you explain that? The golf thing,
yeah,
because I know like that everybody does the deals on the golf course, and you said that you don't sully the temple by making deals inside the temple, and the golf course is a good place to do it outside. Can you
yeah,
run with that a little
absolutely.
bit?
Well, I mean, just look at the game. If you look at a baseball field from overhead, just get a mental picture of that, and then get a mental picture of a square and compass, and lay it over the top of it. And then you look at how many innings there are, and just all these little things. There's Masonic number games all in it. You look at how many holes there are in golf. Well, you have 9 holes front, 9 holes back. 9 plus 9 is 18. 8 plus 1 equals 9. Masonic, gematria. It's linear math. That's how their number games work. So these are just little games that they invented, and they've been monetizing pretty much ever since.
Well,
you know
funnily enough, and again, like just for the other numerology thing there, like I can see that 18 is 3 sixes, so you have the 666, but you could make it 33 3 by 3 to make the 9 and that kind of thing. Is there more to it than that?
I mean, there is, like, I can't remember necessarily all of it at the moment, but there's all kinds of different things about all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, like I said, there's 9 innings. There's like, let's see, what's something else I can think of that. Here's something very personal to you. You'd probably be aware of a monument over there in the UK called I think it's called the Trinity Chapel. Are you familiar with it?
Well, there's a couple of trinities, but it's in England, is it?
Yes, you would
How?
recognize when it's a triangular shaped building.
Oh, okay.
It,
Um, but can
but
you
with
describe it, because I likely haven't been there.
well, it's a triangular shaped building, and they say that they built it for as a monument to the Trinity, right? But
Okay.
if you go there and start looking at it, you'll see that there's a fourth, like, kind of worked into the architecture. The address is 3333, for instance. And there's, like, you'll see three triangles, but if here or there, and or three of this or three of that, but if you really look closely, you'll always notice there's a fourth in there. And what that's referring to are John Dee's four veils, the four veils of Masonry.
Well,
That's the trip to apotheosis, to the God man. And that's also tied in with the Three Musketeers I was talking about. It says Three Musketeers, but you ever notice that even though it's called Three Musketeers, how many musketeers are there actually? There's four, aren't there? So
yes.
you'll see
So
that this three with the hidden fourth pop up everywhere. It's just like the triple tau. You have the triple tau, but if you add another one to it, it becomes the four-way even barred cross of the Templars.
okay. So I mean, a few things there. So tau is the Greek letter T, more or less. Is it? Is that what you
Yeah.
mean by that? Yeah.
T is the truth, and those four veils, they'll often be talked about as the first, second, third, and fourth T's, or truths, etc.
Okay. Okay.
Understanding these is the key to apotheosis, they
I,
say.
I see. Well, look, can we maybe find out everything we might be able to look at these veils from every different way? Because there's a book, and I can't remember who wrote it, but Bill Cooper read more or less the first chapter, and it's available on YouTube. It's beautiful. Video with some lovely scenery, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name. It's Veritas 1984, I think it's called. It's either that or 1984 Veritas.
Mm.
And the book anyway was called The Veil of Isis, and you'll find the video there with Bill Cooper reading it on Veritas 1984's channel. And it talks about, anyway, sorry, it doesn't just talk about, the name of the book is The Veil of Isis. So that's just one veil, but Isis obviously in
Yeah.
Egyptology, very important to the
Well,
Masons and the Templars. Can you run with that and sort of say, is that all of the veils or just one of them? Is there a veil of
that's just
Osiris and so on and so on? Can you go with that?
that's just one that's just one veil. Like, the four veils are something like I got out of it before I mastered all of these, you see. Like, I didn't ever make it high enough to find out what all four truths are. I know there are four truths. Like, I began the process for the first one, but it requires you doing some things that aren't so great. For instance, that veil of Isis you're talking about, right? Well, Isis is known as the goddess with the power to turn men into women and women into men. Her priests in her temple would be dressed as women, and the priestesses would be dressed as men. And you notice how some of these actors ever have to put on a dress? You
Mm-hmm.
notice that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's because they're graduating that veil.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
see, like, there's one of, I think, like, one of the first ones that you're going to have to go through is the humiliation. Basically, the burning down of what was. Who you were. Like, you're basically giving them dirt on you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of your entry level thing. That's where it starts, is giving them the dirt. Where it goes beyond that, like, I'm not quite sure, because I didn't go that far. I bailed before I got myself into that. Don't want to wear dresses, man. I'm just not into it.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, I think that I'll just mention this because you've made me think of a very famous example that people are shocked when they see it. And maybe it's without a context that would make it seem less shocking. But anyway, there's footage of Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. I think both dressed as women, or maybe it's only Rudy Giuliani, and he maybe gives a sort of a big wet lipstick kiss onto Donald Trump's cheek or something like this.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, but I mean, look, it's footage from the 90s from what it looks like to me, and I almost think that I remember seeing it originally on TV somewhere. Now, what I'll say is that you could sort of say, oh, that's just like being a pantomime dame and there was some charity event on and that kind of thing. But of course, you can make some context or pretext around
I
things.
don't
The
care.
re-
I'm not
yeah,
going to like. There's no as a heterosexual man. Like even when I was not Christian, there just was no way you're going to get me into a dress.
yeah. Well, I
It-
mean, the other thing I was thinking of then was the I guess I'll bring it up the Yale Bonesmen, and that they all have to go through a humiliation ritual, which look, who knows whether they have to wear any funny garments or
oh yes,
sort
they
of.
do. They all dress. There's a specific dress code for that ceremony. Each person dresses like one of them dresses like George Washington, for instance. Don't ask me
Right.
why. I have no idea. I just know that that's what they do.
Yeah, and I know there is supposed to be don't they have the skull of some famous pirate or something like that?
Geronimo is the skull they took.
Ah, that's it, of the Indian guy. I'm so sorry for confusing
They
that.
have
Yeah.
others too. It's something they do. They steal skulls. They have Shakespeare's skull too.
Hmm. And look, just in case nobody's ever heard of it, sorry, I didn't mean to just brush that off. I didn't know that they were supposed to have Shakespeare's skull. I did not know, especially the
Yeah.
people who are saying Shakespeare never existed. But anyway,
Well, like it depends on what one means by existed. He was a real person, but whether or not he was the exact one who wrote all that by himself, that can be probably argued for and against. I'm not convinced 100% that, a wool merchant from the 16th century just was able to write all that stuff, but maybe he did. Who
well,
knows?
there you are. Yeah, we might be looking down on somebody who just has to find some way to earn a living, but and a lot of people are going to be in that position now these days. They'll do whatever, but they might actually be very intelligent and learned and wise people.
Yeah.
But if it was just say, who was it that somebody was telling me? I keep forgetting. Is it Francis Bacon that the theory goes? Francis Bacon, maybe
Well,
some guy
there's
like that.
there's one that goes it's Francis Bacon, but I don't find that one compelling at all. The
Okay,
one that I find most compelling is probably the Earl of Oxford, De Vere.
all right.
And if you want some more context into why maybe I think that could be possible, there's a guy on YouTube. His name is Alexander Waugh. He's a Brit, I'm pretty sure, and he's done some work decoding some of Shakespeare's stuff, and it involves that Trinity Chapel I was talking about. And he has a rather compelling argument using Masonic cipher and code, which I know he is using correctly, as far as I know. And he lays out a pretty good argument. Like you should check him out, Alexander Waugh.
Okay, will do. I've heard of, I vaguely heard of somebody called Evelyn Waugh, but I don't know Alexander Waugh. Um,
He's
and
probably not that famous or anything. He's done some. I have seen where he's done some what's the word? Why am I having a brain fart at the moment? Presentations, for audiences and things like with the podium and all that jazz. So I guess he's known some, but you know I've never heard of him until I stumbled across him during my research.
well, presentations is a good word, and I keep forgetting that as well. And it's funny how you forget the simplest of words sometimes. And I say you give a lecture or a speech, and I'm kind of trying to think of a better word. But so presentation is the right, I think, best word. But I think it was in one of my first streams, and I, like I was saying that phrase, how do you square that circle? And there's so many phrases that we use in common English parlance that are actually to be found in so many of the Shakespearean plays.
Oh yes.
Once that you would think, but that's just a part of common speech. Everyone knows that. That's not something he made up. And people can sort of say, well, look, there's no that is in this book or in this play, and there's nothing really that we can find that came before that's written down at least. So it's weird how many of them are. I should maybe call up a few, and actually, I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, right? Because I want to just see if I can give some examples, right? Because I never do this, and it's only a click away, And I was looking at them recently, but I mean, of course, I can't think of any off the top of my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do want to, now that I think about it, just give some examples to show how incredible. Like, people might think, like, who would want to read Shakespeare or whatever, but we're all talking Shakespeare, we're all quoting Shakespeare, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah.
So you go ahead. Yeah, I'll look it up while you talk there.
Yeah. So like on Shakespeare, shout out to Base Lit Analyzer. He would very much like to have this conversation. He does a lot of Shakespeare over on his channel, and but we were just talking about this the other day, and Shakespeare is everywhere in our culture, in our language. It forms the foundation of modern Western society and the way we conversate with one another. I mean, it influences all of our art as far as like movies and media go. I mean, I can't really say enough about how much Shakespeare has affected the Western world. Well, really the world in general, but especially the Western world.
Right. I mean, this is an interesting little deviation, and one of the phrases, there's a few that keep occurring to me, and one of them is, and I think I would love everybody to have this in their heads, always knocking about, because it's part of discernment. I think it's that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I think it's from Romeo and Juliet, and it's more or less like, well, doesn't matter if he's from and I forget their surnames, Montague and something else, is that it?
Yes,
But it doesn't matter what he's called. Go ahead.
Yes, Montague is one of them, and Capulet.
That's
Capulet.
it. I was going to say amulet, but there you are. Thanks a million. Yeah. So yeah, like, anyway, that's where it comes from, but it can be applied to anything, and also it's inverse as well. If something's terrible and you just give it a lovely name, it should still be terrible. But I'll give you an example. There was some fish from South America, and it was called like something like the toothfish, the ugly toothfish or something like this, and then they just decided to call it something much nicer like that. They called it the Patagonian sea bass, and all of a sudden now they can charge $50 an ounce for it or whatever in restaurants.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Perception is a
So
heck of a thing, isn't it?
it is, even though I agree with Shakespeare that it doesn't matter what you call a thing, it doesn't change what that thing is. Unfortunately, it changes people's perceptions who are easily manipulated.
Yes, exactly. It's like
Um,
if you were to go back 200 years ago, if you saw lobster shells outside somebody's house, it meant they were the dirt poorest of the poor. But now lobster is something that, they charge a fortune for.
right, because they were basically just eating sea creatures. They were like
Yeah,
insects of the sea, but now it's like,
yeah, it's
oh
like
yes, we'll have some
they're
lovely.
like cockroaches of the sea, and like the rich really did a number on that. They completely flipped that one around on people. I've always found that funny. I don't eat them myself, but I watch other people do it.
I did when I was a kid, but I don't know why. Maybe I just haven't had the opportunity or whatever lately. But anyway,
Well, my wife's
can I
from
give you a
Maine.
few?
She don't even eat them.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, look, I'll say one thing. Like, people always say, listen, don't eat seafood inland, And I remember being in Las Vegas, and there was some place we walked by, and it must have been like, say, on whatever you call it, the Las Vegas Strip, and every place you'd walk past, the shrimp was getting cheaper and cheaper. So it started off at $1.99, and my friend said to me, like, "Here, do you dare go in and try that $1.99 shrimp?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to be good," But walked past another place, and there was 99-cent shrimp, I dared him to
Well,
try that. And then we found some that was 49 cent shrimp. And I think we all just agreed, listen, we want to be able to get up in the morning and, you know,
you want to
not
survive.
have,
You don't want to wind up in the ER with food poisoning. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good way to get it.
yeah. But anyway, can I give some examples anyway? Like, it's a nice deviation. Just all these phrases, every one you'd kind of say, there's no way. But anyway, apparently these originally appeared in Shakespearean plays. It's all Greek to me. Just the word lackluster, leapfrog, all the
Mhm.
livelong day. Now, this I don't believe. Long-haired. That somebody's just long-haired. He made that up. Come on. I can believe this though. There's method in his madness. I can believe that. The
Yeah,
phrase "your mind's eye,"
yeah,
the naked truth. Neither a
yeah.
borrower nor a lender be. Well, I know that. That's from The Merchant of Venice, and it's about Shylock. But I better leave that one there. But I would encourage everyone to read that particular one.
Yeah, that's a hot
Um,
potato there. Like we might want to skip that one.
good, good. And look, there's probably more. Neither a borrower. Sorry, no, I got the one. I said we're going to skip on. A pitched battle, one fell swoop, outrageous fortune. Up the primrose path, strange bedfellows. The course of true love never did run smooth, and the lady doth protest too much. The milk of human
Yeah.
kindness, to thine own self be true.
I
And
love all those actually. I use those
yeah,
quite. I was just using the lady doth protest too much just the other day.
yes, and you can use it with anybody, you know. And unfortunately, nobody kind of goes, "Yeah, look, fair enough." It just kind of infuriates people. But look, I'll leave it at that. It's amazing, though, isn't it?
Yes, well, that's kind of the thing, like, well, you got to go back. There's a bit of an occult thing to it, really. You got to go back to the way things were prior to Shakespeare. Think about how culture was transferred. You had a bunch of people in their little villages. Most of them never traveled more than five miles from where they were born. And the way that culture was transferred was you had these traveling minstrels who would go around and sing, and then basically just whatever people talked about amongst themselves. Well, with John Dee and his little protege Elizabeth I, we talked about her mother having that sixth finger, like, and everybody thinking she was a witch, right? Well, like, who did she get to mentor her daughter? Well, only one of the greatest sorcerers in all of Britain. And then it turns out, like, she is the one who patrons this theater type deal, which then becomes super popular and begins transmitting a very specific cultural outlook nationwide. Did you notice that?
Well, can I ask you then to be very much more distinct in what you're saying? Because I know you're sort of how are you saying? You're sort of leading us. Well, I'll say you're leading us up the garden path, right? So that we aren't being spoon fed. But you said John Dee? Who is John Dee?
Okay, John Dee was Elizabeth's math tutor. But
Okay.
while being a math tutor, he also owned the biggest library in all of Britain at the time. He was the most learned man in Britain by everyone's standards at the time, which is how, he ended up tutoring Elizabeth in the first place. But they were great friends, very, very close. And he taught her how to use ciphers, and he taught her all kinds of things. He's where you get the moniker 007 from. That's where that's where that was taken from. James Bond and all.
Can you
John Dee
explain that?
he was the first 007. That's how he would sign his name when he and Elizabeth were writing coded letters back and forth to each other for practice and practical reasons, of course. You can understand why teaching the Queen to write the future queen to write coded messages is a helpful thing, and Templars are really good at that, you see. And
And maybe I'm
ever since Elizabeth, every king, queen of Britain has always been a Knight of Malta / Templar, always. and it's been that since before then, but it's been really standardized since Queen Elizabeth. John Dee and his friend Edward Kelly went on a scrying mission where they thought they were talking to angels, and these angels, quote unquote, ended up telling them to swap wives and do all kinds of other stuff that ended up debauching them, and they regretted it for the rest of their lives. But basically, John Dee was an occultist and a tutor, and he was one of the Queen's closest friends, and he taught her magic and the occult arts and all these other kind of things.
Well, I'm gonna say I didn't know any of this. I remember reading about, and we're talking about Elizabeth I, and trying to recall, but her life, or her reign rather, was from somewhere in the latter half of the 16th century, so 15 something up to around 1600. Is that right?
Yes, that would be correct. Absolutely.
And can you tell me how do you spell, is it John and just the letter D, or how do you spell it?
E.
Okay. And is there, I mean, I'm trying to, count the letters of the alphabet here and trying to get 007 out of it, but does DEE turn into 007, or what's the cipher translation there? Is it important?
That was just I can't remember why it was. It they said he used that, but that was just that was the coded name he used to represent himself. It represents something esoteric in numerology. 7 is a divine number, and in gematria, zeros don't really count as actual numbers. So probably trying to say something about him having unlocked the apotheosis type deal, trying to basically call himself divine.
Well, I mean, one thing I think that I learned, and I could be totally wrong, but I remember seeing something that, and I'll go a little bit closer to this. I'll say in the Hebrew letterings, right? That I read somewhere that when we look at them, I mean, everybody might know that it goes from right to left, but apart from that, a lot of the glyphs or the letters, I'm saying glyphs because it might be written in stone or in sand, is that they are the marks. They're made easier with a stick, and so you're going to have these kind of angular things.
Yeah.
And what I remember reading then, or some video that I saw where somebody was explaining that those are just 2D shapes, but they're the representation of what a 3D shape would be if you shone the sun onto the surface of the ground. And so really you're looking at, does that make sense to you there?
Yes, that's exactly right. You're on the right track with that one. It's actually a 3D thing, and the very first level, there's an esoteric thing where if you decode the Torah using a certain gematria, it repeats it repeats a divine number set over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The way that book is encoded it's a kind of a fractal thing. If you start once you start getting into orthodoxy, for instance, and you start learning, there's no end to what you can learn. You can continue basically forever, and until the day you die, and not learn all the intricacies of how it applies to actual life and reality and all these different things. It's fractal in nature.
Yes, and I'm kind of glad you said that, because look, there's always this going on, and I mentioned it I think already in this particular recording, is that, or maybe we talked outside of the recording, but what I'll reiterate it just in case, is that there is always and I'll use the word frisson, right? It excites us. There's something alluring about a mystery, and it draws us in. And then we forget why we're trying to find out all these secrets. And I think that is the trap of all the truth seekers. And I think a lot of people have realized this, that all of the knowledge is fractal. And I think you use that word there again. And I remember, the last time you reminded me of that, I was forgetting that word. So it just ties us up in an ever dividing search for more and more of these truths. And then the fellow Goethe, the German guy, I think it's Johann Goethe. His whole thing about the Faustian thing is, and I think I did a little video on this where he sort of says, basically, I have looked into the law, I've looked into science, I've looked into religion, all the areas of human learning and knowledge. And at the end of my days, what was it all for? It was for nothing. I'm no wiser than before. So maybe it's all designed to preoccupy us with what does because I was going to say, let me just say this, right? I was going to say that the 007 is not a number, but the 7 is like a stick or a pick or a key, if we look at it in a more 3D way, to unlock 2 locks, which are represented by the 2 zeros or O's or something like that. But again, if it is that, so what? Right? What difference does it make, as Hillary Clinton might say in front of Congress?
Exactly. Like, I would agree with you there. And that's kind of one of those things, like, yes, it's nice to have knowledge. But I do want to touch on that mystery thing. That is one thing that Western Christianity has lost that causes it not to work. One of the reasons, one of the very things that make the religion work is the fact that you have the written tradition in the Bible, which that's the problem. Like, Western Christianity tries to lean on, they'll say Bible alone or faith alone or works alone, or they keep trying to do these, they call them the 5 solas, right? Well, that's the thing. Like, you can't divide all these things. You need the Bible. You need the oral tradition that's passed down through the lineage, from the very first apostles that were taught directly by Jesus Christ, and then passed it down. You need that. You also need the mystery. The mystery is so super important. Like, there are certain things that we will never understand quite how they work. We'll never understand how a miracle of somebody who couldn't walk before, who is, prayed over by a priest, can all of a sudden walk. It happens. We don't know why that happens, but it happens. And there are a lot of other mysteries that are integral to the religion itself, that when the church fractured and you ended up with Protestantism and all these other, like, little sects, they basically took the mystery and threw it out. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. They said, well, Rome's corrupt, so we're just going to redo it ourselves. And that's kind of the thing. You can't, and that's why you need this lineage of the church fathers, because if you've noticed, anybody with half a brain in their head can tell, like, well, if all you needed was the Bible itself, then how come everybody who reads it gets a different freaking interpretation then? You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean there, because on the one hand, and this comes back to the original problem of somebody needs to have a certain amount of intelligence to be trusted to work things out for themselves. So I object personally, for me, that any priest or authority figure, whether he's a policeman or a teacher or whatever, it can just accost me and tell me where to go, where I should be at a certain time, and you must do this, boy, until you're a certain age, and then you get to 18, and you go, well, why 18? Because you've already said, like, that some people aren't mature at 18. Is it 21 then? And it's never really a good age, because they never really want to relinquish the control they have over you. However,
30.
Say that again.
I said some people aren't even ready at 30.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say 33, but look, can I just do the however bit? You see,
Yeah,
like, and look, this is going to, like, take it as what it sounds, right? It's not self-praise, right? But I'll say this, right? I think I've said this publicly before, right? It turns out I'm not intelligent at all. It's just that the vast majority of people don't use whatever brains God gave them.
exactly.
And they don't want to. And so I object that a priest will say, listen, I know Latin, I know Greek, I'll tell you what this book says, and don't mind questioning it because God says so. I'm just translating and interpreting for you. And you know the way the authorities in the United States for the last 3 years tried to start saying, do not look into the science of anything, instead of religion. They said, because you're don't worry your pretty little brains about it. In fact, don't tax your brains because they're too small to understand all these highfalutin words. You'd only misinterpret them. You see, you don't even have the knowledge to know what any of the words mean. Just sit back, do nothing, watch your boob tube, watch Netflix, and we'll interpret everything for you, and don't mind what we're up to. So you see,
Never
I can't
trust anyone that does that.
Yeah,
Never
so I
trust
can't.
anyone that says, just believe me, and Just let me take the wheel and you'll be fine right over there. Yeah, don't ever
Right.
trust that person.
And you see, now it sounds like you're agreeing with me, you see, JC, because I do not want any priest or whatever, right, interpreting stuff for me. I'll look at it with my own eyes, or else he'd better explain to me, at least in a manner that is not self-contradictory. But at
Well,
the same time, the problem is, just let me say this a little bit, just so I'm being clear. The problem is that all the rest of my fellow human beings in the Western world, with only a few exceptions, are genuinely too dumb to work it out for themselves. So you can't trust them to do the right thing. So how do we square this circle? That's what I mean.
well, I mean, that's kind of the thing, isn't it? Like, but see, that's the thing about Orthodoxy. You know, I tried the Roman Catholicism thing and I experienced what you're talking about, that kind of like, you know, the Pope has spoken type stuff, and you got to do like, you know, Vatican I, Vatican II, like, you know, the Filioque, these things state pretty clearly that no matter what the Pope says, no matter how stupid it is, like, you got to do it. And I was not with that. And see, that's the thing about Orthodoxy. Like, you know, we'll sit around like on live stream, just like me and you are here with, you know, Father Deacon Ananias, for example, and, you know, just do questions and answers, like, you know, for hours. And that's kind of the way it's meant to work. You're meant to have conversations and questions and to talk about this stuff amongst each other. You're supposed to know philosophy and things enough to like be able to talk amongst your peers and hash this stuff out. Like, how else is anybody supposed to trust it unless they're able to question it? You know, it comes
Yeah.
back to that free will thing. Like, how does God approach this? Well, he gave you free will. Therefore, he doesn't step in and force you to do anything. He wants you to choose to do it yourself. That's what he wants from you. He wants you to go on that journey and choose it yourself. He doesn't want you to submit because he told you to. He wants you to submit because like you've come to the realization that he loves you and that you love him and you need each other. It's just like a teenager who gets mad at their parents, but you know, because they're, you know, you're holding me back, you won't let me do what I want to do, I hate you, blah 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 blah, all the stuff I said when I was a teenager, right? Well, you know, now that I'm a grown man with children of my own, you know, I can sit down with my parents and say, you know, I understand what you were doing. I understand you make mistakes, like, and, you know, you're human just like me. And, you know, there are certain things that, like, you know, you were trying to do for me, and I get that. You know, well, it's kind of one of those things where, like, God has to kind of, like, you know, the only thing God can't do is go against his own nature. If he grants you free will, he's not going to violate it unless you violated one of the you know, fundamental tenets of life, which is, you know, all life is sacred, for instance, so do not murder, right? If you've murdered somebody, for instance, you know, we were talking about this earlier. If you've murdered somebody, for instance, you took a life, you took away their free will, so now your free will has been violated in exchange, eye for an eye type stuff, you see? But you know, it like the Western church tried very hard to make sure that nobody could question anything at all. You know, the Bible had to be in Latin, the mass had to be in Latin, and that's going to be problematic when the population doesn't speak or read Latin, right? So, you know, the Orthodox Church is like never taken that stance. The Bible's always been in the language of the people. You've always been encouraged to ask questions and to, you know, to probe your church father for the answers. And if he doesn't have it, then go, you know, go above his head and, you know, go to the next one until you get the answer that you're looking for. You know, until you like, you know, you satisfied that like that answer is like adequate to the teachings that Christ gave, then, you know, you shouldn't accept it. Like you should have those teachings and be able to discern like if a priest is telling you to do something wrong or not. You know, if a priest tells you to do something that's fundamentally wrong, then you shouldn't do it, right? I mean, it's that simple.
Well, it should be that simple, but that still requires somebody always maintaining a veto over whatever this hierarchical structure is telling them to do. And the hierarchical structure is assuming that it's in charge and it's saying, oh, you're free to ask questions, but we've already framed the whole paradigm within which you exist as being we're the authority. And you can ask us questions, but we remain your authority. So at what point does somebody say, you know what? I throw you off my back because what you're telling me to do now, my own sense of my own morality that comes from within me is telling me, no, I veto what you're telling me to do. You see how we keep
You're
coming
allowed
back
to
to
do
this?
it. You are perfectly allowed to do that. See, what a lot of people don't know, remember when I was telling you about like those three crowns, you have church, state, and you have God up here? Like what a
I
lot of
do.
people don't realize is like in the West, it kind of got things muddled because the church and state became one thing, right? So it became like the church punishing you. That orthodoxy doesn't quite work that way, you see. Like if you murder somebody, like it's going to be the state that punishes you, not the church, and the state is going to punish you based on the laws of the land. And if like those laws, like if it's set up right, then those laws of the land will reflect like the church's laws, such as do not murder, do not steal, those kind of things. But as far as like being part of the church, like if you don't want to be part of it, like then you don't have to be. You're perfectly free to to be a heathen. People were before. You know what I mean? Like it was really more so the Roman church that kind of like the Western Roman church like that started this whole let's run out and make these people become Christian. Like we're not exactly supposed to do that. We're supposed to convince you through like rational logical means. We're not supposed to like hold a sword to your throat and force you. That kind of violates your free will.
Yes, certainly. It would violate my free will. But I was just kind of trying to think of a few things there. There was a lot of stuff you mentioned, and I wanted to sort of say, but I wanted to let you finish there without interrupting you. And so I'm trying to think back now. Look, one thing I want to say is you mentioned Triple Crown, of course, again. And the last time I thought, oh, it's hardly worth interrupting. But seeing as you mentioned a little while back there about how so many games like golf or like the yard lines in football and lots of other things, that it's either encoding Mason numerology or there's other little in jokes. And there's, a what's the right word for it? But it's a tournament called the Triple Crown in rugby football in the UK and in actually it's not just Europe because I think it might include Australia and New Zealand. But anyway, that must be a reference to what you're talking about. Have you heard of that before?
Like state the question again.
Oh, just that there is a cup or the winner of a tournament in rugby football called
Oh,
the
get the
Triple
cup.
Crown. Called the
Yeah,
Triple Crown.
like that's these number games are gonna pop up. Yeah, that's definitely symbolic. Just like the lighting of the torch relay for the Olympics is symbolic. Like most of it is going to go back to a lot of these ancient Greek and Egyptian games that were played,
Yes.
and they were set up the same way. In these esoteric ways. They meant things. They weren't just games. They're elaborate rituals. Just
Yeah.
like a gladiator game, a gladiator combat was not just a gladiator combat. It started as a ritual done at a funeral to honor the dead. The more gladiators you had spill their blood at your funeral, the more important you were. And then it turned into a spectator sport. But
I
still,
see.
it maintains its ritualistic meaning, you see.
Well, I did not know that it started off from games at somebody's funeral. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Or if I was ever told, I wasn't paying attention. Um,
What happened?
can I? There was a few other things, and you mentioned throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a Shakespearean phrase, but I have a feeling that the baby sometimes is Jesus Christ, and for me, as in the nativity, and for me, I knew that, and I'll just say this for a lot of people, I think people are going to disagree for a lot of different reasons. My mother told me, you know, because I just didn't want to go to church after I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. I said, listen, I'm not going to pretend to you that I'm going anymore. I'm just not going. There's that. That's it. My father was very upset because he thought that it would be embarrassing in the neighborhood if people thought that his son was a heathen, right?
Yeah.
But that's not because he was even religious. He was just about whatever is the convention of the day. And so, in other words, he was really a statist, right? It was more about what is the social standing, what does one do in whatever the polite society is. So, if that's the thing to do, so many people go to church or are now are kneeling at the altar of fascistic governments because that seems to be the thing to do. So that leads me on to so sorry, the baby with the bathwater. I realized I may have thrown something out there, and I realized it's not just, oh, I need to become a Christian again or born again or go into any different sect of Christianity. It's that I can simply read what Jesus did in the Bible, and I can take note of the way he comported himself. And I've read the book of John, in the last couple of years. And I really understood the way he stood up to the Pharisees and argued with them like people in court. He was holding his own court, or his own end of court anyway, you know. And that was inspirational. So that was something that I shouldn't have discarded just because I discarded the Catholic Church and its hegemony over our society. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say is, you know, you were sort of saying, okay, but you know, if we have a church structure, we'll keep these people under control. You see, I do agree that in a practical world, all these people who refuse, like you're saying, God wants people to choose it for themselves, and I want people to do the right thing, not because anybody's telling them, but because it comes innately from an innate understanding that they should treat others as they'd like to be treated. But it seems most people are too stupid to figure that out for themselves. So, unfortunately, as I was always told when I was a child, you got to deal with the world as it is, not as you'd like it to be. There's a huge difference between what ought to be and what is, right? And I think that's something that has caused philosophers all this mental turmoil where they basically, you
Can't
know,
get an ought
philosophize.
from an is.
Say again?
You can't get an ought from an is. Like that's
Yes,
a
yeah, that's the
fundamental
phrase. Yeah,
philosophical truth.
right. And just like all these fractal uh, now there's a phrase for it, and it's like a cat, you know, worrying over a mouse or something else. I can't think of the right phrase, but essentially it's all wasted energy, right? Because the Machiavellian attitude will be, okay, well, we understand what people's dispositions are. They can be counted in general, you know, in the great masses to always do the wrong thing. They'll never choose to do the right thing by themselves, so God will be waiting in eternity. So we might as well just keep these people under control. They're too stupid to figure out the right thing to do or know what is right thing to do. So we'll tell them, if they obey, it's their own fault. And of course, you know what I'm referring to, but I'm not going to get into it. You know what I mean? But current
Yeah.
events in the last couple of years. So where's
Well,
you again? I'm saying I can see the morality, right? People say, oh, they have to tell you what they're doing, and so then they get it out, and their bad karma won't come back at them. But listen, none of these fools, they were coerced heavily for sure, but none of these fools had to do it. Same as I'm going to assume you didn't and I didn't, and a lot of other people didn't listen. So again, what's the point in a practical world of hoping these people will figure it out for themselves? But how then do I not be subject to this, what I consider to be illegitimate hegemony of some church, no matter whether it says, oh, I don't have to join it, but then I'm an outcast heathen or whatever, right? And then I'm a member of the out group and could be persecuted. Like, how do we have a world where you have all these people who won't do the right thing, and then a few of us who would like to be kind to our neighbors, but we shouldn't expect anything in return? How do we all coexist then without having all of our freedoms removed? That's my question to you, please, JC.
well, that's what we're all trying to figure out right now, isn't it? You know, I believe personally that like our best bet is for, like, for instance, good Orthodox people who like really do care and really do want the best and don't want to hurt people. Like, you know, if good people have as many children as possible, raise them right with a mother and a father at home, you know, take them to church, teach them philosophy, make sure they don't grow up to be stupid, you know, willfully ignorant slaves, make sure that they, you know, they are taught right. And honestly, Like that's our best bet for having any kind of like, you know, balanced and, you know, just society. Like it starts with the children. We have to teach them. If we teach them and we raise them up correctly and we have enough of them, then the fact of the matter is we will eventually outnumber all of those who would choose to do wrong. And hopefully there would be very few that like ended up falling away from those that were taught right. And eventually one day, you know, things might balance out again. But the truth is, like, as I've told you before, evil is a constant, and the only way to fight it is that way. We have to keep making new warriors for truth and, you know, fighting back. It's never, you know, we'll never be able to fully lay down our arms. That's just reality as it is. Put on the full armor of God and get ready to fight. You know,
Yeah.
his
Well,
emissaries of Lucifer will be fighting, you know, to have their way all the time. This war rages all the time. It's not, you know, it's not one of those things that we're ever going to get a break from. There's lulls in the fighting, just like any war. You know, you're going to have, you know, little ceasefires here and there, but really and truly, evil never does sleep.
yeah. I mean, one thing I have noticed about a lot of these relatively uncreative, certainly I was going to say dim bulbs, but they have a certain amount of creativity, but it's what their real aptitude, or I would say, or uh, their skill area. If it's like top trumps, and anyway, so I'm missing the right word, but in any case, as you said, evil never sleeps. And what I've noticed about these people is that they've got seemingly limitless energy to keep plugging away at whatever task they've been assigned, and they keep going at it, even though to me I would find it to be the most boring, monotonous, rote task to do over and over again, but they keep doing it.
Mm,
Um, what I wanted to kind of maybe see if I can refine a bit more, because I think you kind of might have answered it, but I really want to hone in on this because I think we're getting a little bit closer to this. And I don't expect it to be resolved or solved anyway. And we don't have to have a full meeting of the minds either. But there was one thing where you sort of said, okay, we got to have more good people and people who teach their children to be good. Well, listen, I mean, I don't mean to be doing a Bill Clinton on you, but it depends on what each individual's definition or perception or idea or concept of good is, and I don't think it's the same. So that's one problem, right?
exactly.
And then,
Hence
yeah,
why, yep, like, you know, for instance, Orthodox people having more, you know, like, but, you know, that's one of the benefits to the church as well. Like, you know, there are, I could go on all day about the outside benefits here or there, but that is one of the big ones is that it produces a society that has trust. It's kind of like here in America, when everybody in America, like when 99% of people in America were all Christian, people didn't even lock their doors. You know
yeah.
what I'm
Well, I
saying?
can. Oh, I can say when I was growing up, you didn't have to do that, and all your neighbors had copies of keys of your house in case you got locked out, and you wouldn't have to lock your car. There's just no worries about anything. Um, and I'm not saying that that all changed with immigration, but because there were some bad areas and there was some burglaries and robberies, but things changed a lot, and I do think that the removal of the hegemony of the Catholic Church or Christianity had a lot to do with it, because people were told, oh, actually, it turns out God isn't necessarily looking at you and seeing you when you're like Santa Claus. Basically, I said, you know, God is like Santa Claus for adults. He sees you when you're sleeping. He can get inside your head. He knows all your thoughts. He knows all the crimes you're about to commit before you commit them. So don't be committing crimes, you know, because God sees it even if you don't get caught by a policeman. I do think that that mentality was keeping a lid on a lot of crime as well prior to the 90s.
Yeah, yeah, like it, you know, it, there's also a, like, there's also an element to it that has to do with the schism and the fracturing of the church, in my opinion. Like it's one of these things that philosophies are one of the are a thing that they they evolve through time, you know, on that lineage I was talking about. And you know, if you start from the if you look start from their presuppositions, You look at the people, for instance, that founded America, these different groups that came together and, fought to like found this country as its own thing. You look at their fundamental presuppositions and you start to see like how, like, if you're consistent with them and you follow them throughout, like you follow all these philosophies from the Enlightenment and you take them to their natural conclusion, it all starts to make sense as how we got here. It's like I told somebody before, it's philosophies and like slash worldviews are kind of like a computer program. Like once you pop that disk in and you hit run exe, it's going to do what it does. And if it's got broken pieces of code in it, it's going to cause the computer to act in really stupid ways. You see what I'm saying? If that makes any sense.
Oh, JC, it's too much of a rich seam for me to go down now, but I absolutely know what you mean. And I'll just say this, the execution of a computer program and all the language to do with that is exactly the same as the law, because the law interprets, the judge or the people who are in the court interpret the law, and they're supposed to do it blindly, and that's perfectly in line, or it's absolutely analogous with a computer program, and that it's just run by the computer and it does exactly what it's told to do, no more, no less.
Yeah, without any emotion. It's completely rational. And that's what the West did when it broke away from the main body of the church. You see, the actual church is a balance between rationality and emotion. You know what I mean? It's the mystery of how those two things kind of, function together like in a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remove all the emotion and go completely rational, you're going to have problems. If you remove all the rational and go completely emotional, you get the left. You see what I'm saying? Like when you set up this dialectic between these two things without the church to reconcile those two opposites, without Christ to reconcile those two opposites, they end up in a dialectical tension that brings us to where we are now.
JC, again, I mean, I have to say, absolutely, that makes total sense. And I'll give you an example. I think it was Richard Feynman. He's a scientist. I think he was also of a religion that I'll say people might go, oh, I'm suspect of that. But I have to say, if there are good guys, I think he's a good guy. Nobody's perfect, but I think he's a real good guy and lived a lovely life. And I think it was said about him that he was a scientist, or he had the brain of a scientist, but the soul of a poet. And again, this is exactly, the duality or it seems like, did you say a dichotomy or a contradiction or something
It's
like
a
this?
paradox.
A paradox.
A lot of things about the divine are paradoxes. For instance, how Christ is, he's has these two natures. He's both fully God and fully man. It's not a one or the other. It's a both and. It's not, it's not saved by works or saved by faith alone, or it's both and. You know what I'm saying? Like it's always this both and. It's not supposed to be a dialectical tension where these two things are always butting heads against each other. Male and female is not supposed to be a thing where you got feminists over here and MGTOW incels over here and they hate each other. We're supposed to be married together. We both need each other. So these dialectical tensions are what breaks our society down.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say earlier, but I'll correct it now in a second. But I was going to say earlier, oh yeah, just like the church, the different offices, or sorry, different, I can't think of the proper civic term for it, but the different auspices of the state keep each other in check. But then the church is to the state not keeping it in check, but balancing it. So if the state just runs things like the law does, just totally dispassionately, without a soul, then the church is the soul, so that everything is not cut and dried. It brings the gray areas, and so maybe it's like a solution in which the solids can dissolve, and there is a, I guess solution is a word, that it all works swimmingly. And equally, like you say, men and women aren't meant to be at loggerheads, but they don't pay each other compliments, but they complement each other in that they sort of like the yin and yang, where one leaves off, the other takes over, and they support each other and they bring out the best in each other and bring different things to a complete
Yeah.
synthesis of the two, maybe.
From the Orthodox point of view, it's like man and woman are facing back to back. Man is facing towards God in heaven, and the woman is facing towards the home, the children, and the world. You see,
Okay.
and through these two things, like, we bring each other closer to the middle and that narrow path. Like, we have things we can teach each other, but we also are, it's acknowledged that we are equal but opposite in ways. You know what I'm saying? Like, the man takes the lead. It's kind of an unsaid thing, but I like the way a guy had put it once. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck, and the head only looks where the neck turns.
Right.
Where the
Okay.
man is the head, as is auspiciously on the face of it, the man is the head and the leader. It's not that he's leading on his own. He has her right behind him, supporting him. They're back to back.
Well,
It's
and of
kind of
course,
things that, imagine two warriors back to back, circling around as, the world closes in around them. It's the two of you against the world.
oh, for
You
sure.
have these children that are in between the two of you there, and, like, you have to defend them. And you do that with Christ's word and his, and you have all these different things, like the fasting, that teaches you how to do without things, how to deprive yourself of things when need be, so that you can't be tempted. That way somebody can't say, oh, well, I hear you really like ice cream. Wouldn't you, like, don't you want this ice cream, don't you? That's a really stupid example, but you get the idea. That's really what the fasting does. It teaches us to be able to to put down things that we would really like to do. It's not that we fast from meat not because eating meat is bad. We fast from it because eating meat is good, and you want to teach yourself to be able to fucking to let go of things that you like when you have to, to make sacrifices. What did Christ do? He made a sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, right?
Yes.
Like, that's really what life is about. People are always like, what's the secret of life? It's sacrifice. Willing sacrifice is the key to what makes a human being happy.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was going to say, like, I couldn't disagree with anything there, except I'll say what I'm going to say is that the example, the ice cream, absolutely doesn't have to be the best of examples, but I think it's a good one because it shows that something like that might seem like, oh, that's harmless. Ice cream never did anybody any harm, but anything taken to extremes is going to become a problem, and anything that you
Absolutely.
depend on, if they threaten to take it away from you, then they have control over you. And
Bingo.
look, that's the way we see it in society. Like, we know that there's, let's just call it a hidden hand that is offering people temptation to do what they're told, and then they're threatening them with public, not just embarrassment, but oh, there's much worse than that. But public revelation of all their dirty deeds. That's maybe to be a bit more exact about it. If they don't toe the line, so it's the carrot and the stick there. And so you do not want to have either of those things being held over you. Either, good
Yeah.
donkey, you like these ice creams held over in front of you instead of a carrot, but whatever. And then the other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to say is that your description of the visual image of a man and woman with their backs to each other, they have each other's backs, and then they're circling around, keeping the wolves at bay, and then they have their children inside their inner circle, and they're, I suppose the children are at their feet, but safe within an inner circle there. And so that's a
Yeah.
really good visualization anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you like it. I pride myself on my little analogies. I use them
Yeah.
all the time. I find them really useful when you're trying to describe something to someone.
Well, you mentioned earlier about how, culture used to be contained within a 5 mile radius. Maybe that's what they're trying to go back to in kind of feudal ways, and that how does one
Yeah.
idea get to another? And I realized from watching an episode of Star Trek, but much later, that there was an episode where I think it's like a Klingon or something like this, or maybe it's another kind of alien species like that, and they don't really have a language that can be translated directly because they only speak in metaphor, and they kind of say like to each other
Yeah.
things like, "Oh, that's the Battle of Kanach at when Katang took whatever, I can't think of another name, but some Rochach or whatever it is, and that's, you can't
Mhm.
translate that, but that's all lore, and you just condense it down to, oh, that's like this. Do you remember when this happened? And
Mhm.
so we'd like to think that we're more sophisticated, but in fact, we do talk to each other in all these metaphors, and they're usually visual things that relies on the person you're talking to having the same mental image, and they often don't, which is why I have found that it's pretty much impossible to have a conversation with anybody where they can see what you're seeing in your mind's eye. You cannot translate it. Plus, they're usually going out of their way to try to misinterpret you so they can get offended and then have you subjugated by the morality police that everyone seems to want now in Western society.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on who you're dealing with, of course, and their personal philosophy is always going to come down into it. And this is something I talk to my wife about all the time, and it's part of what these people have been doing. They're like, that's part of the occult arts. They understand all these things that me and you are talking about. They understand them intimately, and because society at large doesn't, it allows them to use this stuff to great effect. To great effect. It's crazy how easily people can be led around by the nose, and yeah, but every once in a while though, you have someone like yourself, and like I've met you, and I can have a conversation with you and use these metaphors, and you can understand perfectly fine what I'm talking about. But if we allow the elite to keep doing what they're doing and changing the definitions of words, like, we are going to continue to have some serious communication issues. Society will break down. Like, you can't have a prosperous society when everybody's running on a different set of definitions. We understand the world through narrative and through story, and if you change the definitions of words, now you've changed the nature of the story. And like you said, like, it then makes it impossible for two people to understand each other.
Well, yeah, and let me say this because again, I'm going to be very pessimistic that there is any solution to this, but let me just unfold a little bit of what you said there, right? Or just reiterate, in that, it's going to be increasingly difficult. Well, I have been finding, and I'm sure many other people have been finding it as yourself, it becoming increasingly difficult to have a conversation with anybody. I mentioned one time there that I was accosted by a guy in South Africa, and he was a lovely gentleman fellow. He looked a few years older than me. He looked very refined in a nice suit, hair all nice, and we were all in a lovely restaurant. And he wanted to get in with our group, and he was sitting on his own. So I thought, oh, it'd be nice, this guy. Yeah, if he wants to make conversation, he can come over. And his opener was basically, or he sort of maybe just his opening salvo from where he was sitting was, isn't it terrible what's happening in America? And I said, well, what? And he said, Donald Trump, and he's destroying everything. And I went, all right. And he goes, and all the other things, right? And I just sort of said, oh, how is he doing that? And immediately he knew, oh, this guy's an enemy. And he wanted to go straight into fisticuffs. And prior to that, but he was spitting in my face and red, and all getting red around the neck. And I couldn't believe that he was that ideologically possessed. And I would have figured he is a well-educated person. He's probably, he must have a good job. He's got an expensive car and a house, all the trappings. But these are, so, very middle class, right? And people might expect it would be people without education and all that kind of thing. I found, look, you get people who know what's what from any class, and most of them don't from any class. But anyway, what I want to say is, absolutely. It's because if it gets any more difficult, I can't say how it will, but it can always get worse. And there's a level, you see, of willful misunderstanding. And earlier you said, just teach people philosophy, right? But people don't want to be taught philosophy; they just want to be right. And
Some do.
you're throwing, well, most people do, and you're throwing pearls before swine with most people because they know that you're trying to set them up to be proven wrong. And you mentioned defining the words because you're using the same words, but they have entirely different meanings. And have you noticed about, like, it just happens to be with the left in particular They want to reserve the right to change the meaning of words at any time from day to day, in case we'd say, well, here are your words from yesterday, and that contradicts what you're saying today, and they want to continuously be right. So they'll say, well, we didn't mean those words in the same way, and they'll constantly do this kind of gerrymandering or semanticization of words, to find little legal loopholes, like Bill Clinton saying that depends what you mean by or what the definition of is. You see, it gets into reductio ad absurdum, where that they're deliberately trying to hide in absurdity, but they actually know what's going on. So it's not a question that they're not educated or they don't understand the terms. They're deliberately trying to make everything be meaningless because they will refuse outright to define their terms. And that precludes the possibility of ever having any meaningful or any dialogue that could come to any meeting of minds. So do you see the problem? I think you know it. Does everybody else know it? What do we do?
Problem. I know it's a problem. And, it's like I've told you before, like, even though I think this is the best option, and like, I do need to take a little bathroom break here in a second, but I want to leave you with this. Like, even though I do think this is the best option, and I have a lot of faith in it because I've seen, generation Y and Z come and actually be interested in orthodoxy and philosophy. Like, we have 7,000 people in that Discord plus that are, inquiring and wanting to know. People are hungry for the truth, especially this younger generation. They're hungry for truth, for philosophy, and they do want to learn. And there's quite a bunch of them out there. And while it might seem like we're outnumbered now, like, if you give it a few generations time with us teaching these children how the world really works, not letting them be indoctrinated by the school system, actually teaching them how the world really works, teaching them philosophy and like all these things, once you've taught like new generations that, and you figure every family has 3 or 4 kids, you start to like not be the minority anymore. And that group that you've now passed this lineage on to can now do real good in the world. And yes, sometimes that good means picking up arms and going to war against people who are evil and deliberately trying to destroy civilization and hurt people. Our God is a God of peace, but he is also a God of war. And if that be what they want, then it might come down to that.
Yeah, it might come down to war. Well, look, I figured that there is no peaceful solution. Now, look, let me not be too pessimistic, right? But because I don't want to sort of say to everyone, yeah, that's it. This is it, boys. This is war. Because it should have been, if there ever was going to be, this is it, boys. This is war. That should have happened a few years ago. The fact that it didn't basically means to me that I have lost faith in humanity. But I'm not going to try and say to anybody, you nor anybody else, that they shouldn't be optimistic. But and I was going to joke and sort of say, well, you won't join me in my pessimism. And if we do say there's no solution, then that does mean that everything is for naught and we have to give up. So I'm not suggesting that either. But I know you were saying you want to go for a break, and I was thinking, look, we've gone beyond 2 hours here, and we could wrap it up with just kind of some final thoughts, and then have another discussion about it, because we can keep approaching more and more to this, because there's more I want to kind of tease out of this, but it could be left for now until it's an unanswered question. We haven't resolved it yet, and leave it for another time. But say something that you want to say there anyway.
Well, what I would say on the war thing is that we already are at war, John. Like, we've been at war for a while. It just isn't. It's not what people think of as war, because war in this technological age has evolved. Like what we're doing right now. Right, what we're doing right now is an act of war. We are fighting back against the machine. And just because it hasn't become kinetic yet does not still mean that we're not at war. But I would argue that it has most certainly become kinetic, because we have wars being waged around the world right now. So, not only is it kinetic, but it's also, it's also digital. It's in the digital realm. It's on the internet. It's us having these talks and educating people. they've been waging war against us for generations through the school systems and media, et cetera, et cetera. And if we have any hope of straightening this out, it's going to require us doing some of the same stuff. We're going to have to combat their, their warlike tactics that are running underneath the surface with our own.
Well, look, I'm kind of just saying this for the spirit of conversation, but I only recently learned that Friedrich Nietzsche said that hope is the worst of all cruelties because it prolongs man's suffering, right? And so I'll do a little short video on that soon because I think there's humor in that. But I will sort of say, okay, fine, I won't give up all hope just yet. I'll go in for another round of pain and waiting for more generations for people to sort themselves out. So look,
Right.
Again, I'm sort of saying it's fine to leave things unresolved. It's as if any two men walked into a bar and solved all life's problems. You know what I mean? As if that ever happened. But I do agree with you that look, if maybe this isn't the first time we've achieved this level of technology. I do remember when they invented MP3 audio files and MPEG-4 video and AVIs and whatever. I never thought it would lead to all this kind of proliferation of everybody talking, right? For a long time, I've been thinking it's just chatter. But look, I'm hoping that you and I are contributing in some way to this war that's on many fronts in a, whatever they call it, fourth generation, fifth generation, digital or many fronted war.
Yep. Multifaceted.
Multifaceted, exactly.
Yes, like I mean, I would say this, like, think about this, is suffering really such a bad thing? Always. It can be, but suffering isn't necessarily always a bad thing. Sometimes it requires suffering to wake you up. I was very much just like all of these, these lefties running around spouting some of the same stuff once upon a time. And, at a certain point, I woke up. So, don't give up hope, John. Hope can be rough, but it also can lead to some beautiful things.
Yeah, well, look, I couldn't argue with you say that suffering is good for the soul, but I still resent it, right? And I object to having to be taught these things when I was never given the opportunity to just say, "Here, listen, here's the what you need to know on this planet." I should have been given a little pamphlet. So you've arrived on Earth. Here's what you need to know. I would like to write one of those things, but I will say to you, like, that as far as don't give up hope, I'm kind of agreeing to do that with you. I'm kind of going, all right then, JC, one last hurrah then, eh? Once more into the breach.
I'll tell you what, like, if you'll meet me halfway, we'll ride this sucker out together and we'll see where it goes.
All right, well, look, seeing as I'm still here, it's better than sitting in the corner with a miserable face on me. All right?
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So look, I think that's a pretty, yeah, go ahead.
I said, it doesn't cost nothing to try. If you don't try, though, you're definitely going to lose.
Well, that's it. And I think that is my motivation, right? If it turns out there is an afterlife and I get there and God says to me or whatever says to me, listen, why did you not do anything? And I'll be like, oh, I didn't want to, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to regret stuff that I could have done while I had the opportunity.
Yep. That's where I came to, like my heart stopped for over 3 minutes and like, I got to like experience that. And, you don't like, trust me, the last place you want to be is on your deathbed and still like wondering, well, should I? It's not going to be like, you're not going to regret as much what you didn't or what you did do. You'll regret even more what you didn't try.
Well, they do say that, and as I grow older, I do understand the wisdom of those words. To go for it, like in Dead Poets Society. They say "seize the day," don't they? It's become such a cliche, the old carpe diem. But you kind of do have to live by that a lot without being reckless. There's a balance in all things, But you do regret, as you say, the things you didn't do more so than the things you did.
Yeah, like you'll regret not giving that last hug to that loved one. You'll regret not telling them you love them one more time. You will regret, not going to church more. You'll regret not studying more. You'll regret all those kinds of things. Like, but I can tell you this, like, there were very few things that like I did that like were on the front of my mind. There were some, the really worst things that I did that were right there on the forefront, but it was mostly like the bad things as far as neglecting loved ones and things like that that I regretted. I regretted not being a better member of my community. I regretted a lot of things like that. Those would be the things that I would leave folks with, as far as like, you really want to make sure you got that spirituality and like your connection with your loved ones like down pat before you get there.
Yeah, well, it is true. And with Christmas coming up, I'm going to take note of that, and do my best to forgive. And maybe you said to me before, not necessarily forget. But I will absolutely. I mean, my mother is dead now, and I do regret not using the best time or the best of the time. I could have spent more time with her, and I do miss her, and I wish that I could still talk to her. So people did say to me when I was a child that you better be nice to your parents, or you better spend enough time with them, talk to them, learn about them when they were children. Before they're gone, because when they're gone, and you can never talk to them again. And I was sort of, as a child, I was like, yeah, whatever. You never think you're going to get older, and people said that to me as well. But life does flash by, and before you know it, you're suddenly an old man.
And that brings us back around to the beginning of this conversation, perception. Perception is a heck of a thing.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit, or
Well, I mean,
did
yeah, sure. Like, I mean, that's what I've been like. Well, that kind of has been like the theme of the conversation, hasn't it? Like, it's you can have a perception of something when you're younger, or in this position that you're standing in right now. You see the world in a certain way, but in a lot of ways, it's like looking at a tapestry through a magnifying glass, like an inch from the surface. Like you can see everything about this one little spot you're standing in really well, but you have no idea what that spot over there is going to look like when you get there.
Absolutely. About seeing the big picture and the tapestry, and then there's things like magic eye illusions, and then the perspective of being able to stand back far enough to see everything in context. Absolutely, all that analogy. People need to turn all that stuff over in their heads with regards to perspective, and the dangers of becoming too specialized in your area of expertise as well. It means to become more blind.
Exactly that. Exactly that, brother. I couldn't have said it better myself. Specializing is, the death of the intellect. A person stops thinking in like creative ways. They only see the world through one lens. That's it.
Yeah, a
And
myopic view.
and that's where that's how we wind up where we're at. Nobody knows nothing. Like I'm not a expert, so how could I say? It's like, you're not stupid though. Like,
Exactly.
you're
Yes.
willfully ignorant, but you're not stupid. You
And there
don't
is,
have to be.
yeah, and there is slightly a fear of being sued. Like, you didn't have the right credentials, therefore you didn't have the authority to make that judgment call, and so everyone's looking for a scapegoat to put all the blame on, and they kind of go, "Not me." Just say, "I wash my hands of this. I am not an expert in that. That's up to somebody else to take the not only the not only assume the authority, but to assume the authority and responsibility if anything goes wrong." You know.
Yeah. But I mean, all that's purposeful. That compartmentalization is how, that's how masonry works. You compartmentalize everything. That's how the military works.
Yes.
Everything is compartmentalized and atomized. Once everything's atomized, that's what they're trying to do with people now: sequester you in your home, and you talk to everybody through a screen. It atomizes you. And what do cults do to people? It atomizes the cult members. It isolates them from their families and their loved ones. Anyone who could tell them, hey dude, like, this is kind of weird, that wants to get you away from all that, so that it is the only one that can feed your head with stuff. And that's what they're trying to do. They're using the exact same methodology that the ancient cults in Egypt in Greece and in the, you know, all through time, these cults have been doing the same things to their members, and now they've just blown it up to a larger scale.
Yes. I mean, you can see that the same methodology is going on with, you know, all the societies and the corporations. And what I have noticed in the corporations is that everything, of course, gets specialized and atomized, as you say. And they have charts about like who is responsible for a project, who is accountable for a project, who needs to be consulted for a project, and who needs to be informed about a project. And it's called the RACI RACI chart. And what you always find is all these little clever managers, they assume the responsibility for things, but that doesn't mean they're accountable for anything. So, in other words, they grab the authority, but never
The
are they to be
responsibility.
held actually accountable for stuff, responsible in the sense of being responsible. But the atomization, then I just want to say as well, when you split everything up into departments and then different areas and team leads and then sub leads and all this kind of thing, and then subject matter experts for all these other specializations, when you spread a project out so big like that, nobody has any oversight or is at a position where they can be held accountable, so that when it's split up that much, nobody's accountable when it all goes wrong, and it always does. Now, I used to joke when we'd start a project and you'd list off who are all these people in the project, and I'd say, well, look, first order of business, like we always do, we select our scapegoat for when it all goes wrong. That's the first order of business every time you spin up a project. And they laughed, because obviously we don't do that officially, but unofficially, that's exactly what happens.
Yep. Everybody knew it too. That's why they laughed.
Yeah.
It's just like down here in Hollywood, you know, you'll see people like they'll get a historical expert. You know, we have a historical consultant, an expert in you know, medieval, like, you know, this or that, and you know, because I know somebody that does that, and you know, they got called on there and they got consulted about one thing. They got asked one thing, and they listened to him, nodded their head, said thanks, and then completely ignored him. They
Oh,
just
yeah.
want the expert's credit on there so they can tell people we had an expert.
Yes. It gives
Because that's
the
what people care
air.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sort of bestows the air of credibility. And then they can blame
Yeah.
that guy if it goes wrong. Well, he said it was all right and he was informed about the whole thing. And of course, by the way, just because they inform people or consult with people doesn't mean they have to do what they're told, but they can still blame those people.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And that's why, like my friend would say, don't do work with Hollywood.
Yes, yeah.
He
Because
said
you
you
know
always,
what way it's going to go every single time.
yeah. He said you always get burnt. He said, like, every time you do a deal, you know, it's like you're looking at these people, nodding, eating dinner with them, being friendly, and you know at some point they're going to screw you and you're going to screw them, but everybody's going to be friends afterwards anyway, because that's the way it works.
Yes, you are dealing with people who are not acting in good faith, but they think that, well, we all know what's what here, and if you don't, then you're too naive to be out in the world. And if you believed
Yeah.
us, that's on you.
Yeah, you get what you deserve. Like, if you're not educated enough to know better, then that's your fault. That's where exactly the position they're going to take.
Mm.
And that's the way of the Luciferian. It's a law of the jungle type thing.
Mm.
You know,
If you're stupid enough to fall for it, as you say, then you deserve it.
if you're too weak, then you deserve to get eaten.
Yes.
And that's just the Luciferian way.
Yeah.
And it's just like people in masonry that don't realize, like, that you're supposed to grow beyond it. Like, you know, that's their fault if they remain a porch mason and never realize that, like, you're supposed to you know, to further your you know, your learning and go beyond, you know, that little group. But most don't.
Well, it reminds me of that poem that I remember Donald Trump famously read out. You knew I was a snake when you let me in, so they kind of go, "Look, you should have
Well,
recognized me for my appearance and the way I was acting."
yeah, well, I mean,
So,
his mentor that he's listed as his mentor was Norman Vincent Peale, who was a pastor, but he was also a high-ranking Mason.
right, that name rings a bell. I have a feeling that he's a name people should look up. Isn't that right?
Oh yes, oh yes. You know, and there you can see Trump's understanding. The way, you know, even the way Trump Tower is designed is in an esoteric manner. Like, you know, it's a giant symbolic thing, like it's like a giant phallus sitting in there. But
So it's Osiris's member that was thrown into the Nile.
yeah, almost like that. And then it's got a representation of the feminine on it as well. Like you can see the bushes if you look at them just the right way. It's a, you know, it's an upside down triangle, which is the representation of the divine feminine.
Right. Or V for not vendetta, but V for something else. That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, that kind of thing. And you know, you just see these little things, and I can't say 100% whether Trump's a Mason or he isn't, but it would be my suspicion that he is, just based on the symbology that he puts around him. You know, he has the golden toilet and the golden suite, with just like, you know, some other Sun King I know, and you know, just saying.
Sure. I actually have a feeling that it might be a matter of public record that he is. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think it is pretty clear to people that he is. But they kind of feel like, well, look, you have to go up the ranks and play golf with all these people if you want to get anywhere in politics or business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how a
So,
lot of people look at it, but like these connections, you know, they mean more than that. He
oh,
said
I
it
know.
best himself. He does favors, and that's the Masonic way. You do favors for me, I do favors for you. And you know, he made clear like all of his tenets and ways of operating are like right out of the Masonic playbook. And you know, I can see it, but it, you know, a lot of other people I know can't, and you know, it bothers me. But you know, what can I do? If they want to choose the lesser of two evils, then that's up to them. But you know,
Well,
I'm
look,
not, I'm not convinced either side is going to be helping us any at all.
no, no. Someone, I think it was maybe it was you that said it's like hailing a cab and you get either a red or a blue cab, but that's your only choice. You're still going to the same destination.
Yep, that's
Um,
my analogy for sure. I say that one a
yeah.
lot.
Can I also say, just look, I better say this in case it's anybody who doesn't know, and I don't think that it's a very well publicized matter of fact, and it is a matter of fact, it's on public record, that I think the year was 1995, and that the story of the normal official history that we all read in the newspapers was that Donald Trump had invested in the Taj Mahal casino complex, and that it was turning out to be a albatross around his neck, or whatever is the phrase for something that's weighing you down, and
Yes,
that he was
his,
in huge financial. Yeah, he
yeah,
was
the people
extended.
he had running it died in a helicopter crash, actually, and that's
Oh,
what
really?
screwed him. He doesn't know how to run the thing. Like he had to hire people to do it, and the people he hired to do it died. So
Well, I'm going to place my bottom dollar. I'm going to place my opening chip then, let's say, and bottom dollar on saying that I have a feeling that that helicopter crash was mightily convenient for some people, just like you know, if certain people were on the Titanic was mightily convenient, and everything is
yeah,
mightily convenient about all these things.
isn't it? Isn't it? And that's what I say. Like, you know, you can't like it's you can't just jump to a conclusion from, you know, from just that little bit, but it throws up red flags. You know,
When you
I
see
like what
patterns,
Christ said. Look at the fruits of their actions. That's the
yeah,
best indicator of who you're dealing with.
when you see patterns with tiresome regularity, you kind of go, "Oh, listen, I've heard this one before. I'll
Yeah,
tell you how this one goes," you know. But look,
it's
I
that.
just want to say, I want to say this for the matter of record, in case anybody doesn't know, because it's a vital key piece of information to know about Donald Trump and about politics in general and about the banking system. Is that, I mean, because you couldn't get any more smoking gun than this. Um, when Donald Trump got into trouble with the Taj Mahal casinos, the figure that they say is that he was 650 or round about that amount of millions of dollars in the red. So he was financially insolvent.
How
And
did he
I
get out
will
of that?
say that again.
I said, and who did he go to get out of that one?
Right. Well, do you want to say the name of the guy?
Well, Red Shield is what the name means anyway.
Exactly. So it was the Rothschild Bank of New York. I think it was their corporate insolvency bureau or something along those lines, or their um they're mergers and distressed assets, something like that, right? Now, wouldn't
Yeah,
it be convenient if they create their own distressed assets? They can come in and then say, "Oh, we'll help you out." And do you know what the
absolutely.
name of the guy was who was working for Rothschild Bank of New York at the time?
Like I know the guy, I just can't like I can't
Well,
say the name at the like
well,
right on the tip of my
say I'll give you a clue. Say Roth, but with a lisp.
uh Ross. Yes,
Yeah,
Ross.
exactly. Yeah. So it's the same bloody name. It's his
Yeah,
name was Wilbur Ross.
yeah, yeah. Which like the Rothschilds were originally they were originally Bowers was their is
Yes.
their real last name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's
they
the
took
red
that.
shield, and we
Yeah, off the sign in front of their business.
exactly, and we think that it's tied up with the Templars who helped them do their business and be enforcers maybe if people didn't pay their debts. Wouldn't that
Well,
be
the Templars invented
reasonable?
banking in the first place. And another good one to look up the Fugger banking family. Not with the Fuck, but with the Fugg. Fugger.
Fugg. Okay.
Yes, the Fugger banking family.
Is it
Um,
Fugger?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Fugger. And you'll find some interesting stuff with all that. It's tied up with the Venetian black nobility, and it's the one who built the original spy network for the Vatican Bank.
Okay. Well, that's a name I hadn't heard of, and it's definitely another, like, these are useful pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, so that we never forget that, like, we know without needing to have any beliefs. Like, there are factual things you can point at to say that proves that there are people who act in unison for their interests, and they don't, if they align with our what appear to be our superficial interests momentarily, well and good, but we're not for the long haul. They're not working for us.
Right?
But I want to finish this off to get this, just to say, while I'm on the subject, to say, to complete the story of Wilbur Ross, is that I remember seeing a documentary. I can't find it, but maybe somebody can find it. And I think it was Wilbur Ross speaking. But if it wasn't him, it was what he described as one of the members of his consortium, and he used that word consortium, and it's a very meaningful word. And people might say, there's no conspiracy. Fine, get rid of that word. We'll use consortium of businessmen with a common interest, because that's the phrase he used. And he said, the consortium, of which I was a member, we felt that Donald Trump was of more use to us alive rather than dead. And then he went on to clarify, by dead, of course, I don't mean, his corporeal body dead. We mean his financial life dead or alive. And then he went on to explain, or else he implied it and I inferred it, which was that, okay, basically it doesn't matter if you're alive, but you're not one of these players with money. If you don't have money like we do, you're all dead anyway. We consider you to be dead. And then the ending to the story is, when Donald Trump got elected in 2016 and he was the president elect, he announced the next day that his secretary of the Treasury was going to be the very self same Wilbur Ross. So that, or Wilbur Roth, maybe. So, because I'm getting confused now whether it's Ross or Roth. But that's what I wanted to sort of say to you to complete the little circle there, in that you're talking about doing favors for people and then you return the favor. Talk about returning the favor. So, what
Mhm.
say you to all that then,
Like that's
JC?
it. That's exactly the points I would make. That's the stuff that like that was the red flags that caused me to go on a tirade against Trump in the first place. Back when he was doing his thing, everybody got mad at me because I was so avidly not for Trump that a lot of people I knew got mad at me. They didn't like that I was anti-Trump. They're like, "Are you crazy?" They set up this false dichotomy that if you're not for Trump, then you must be for the other people. And it's like, no, no, I'm not for either of them. I think they're both kind of full of it and, going to lead us off a cliff. So, but getting people to understand that there could possibly ever be a conspiracy like where they've been fooled for, their entire lives. Like, it's really hard to get over that cognitive dissonance because, for people to accept this, they have to accept that they've been fooled for their entire lives and they were lied to, and that probably a bunch of things that they did probably wouldn't have been done if they had known better. You know, there's a lot of baggage that comes along with accepting this stuff.
There is, and it does, as you say, mean that people have to admit that they've been a fool for their entire lives. And I've never met anybody who wants to actually do the hard work of undoing all the false assumptions and false beliefs that they have, because it's far easier to go, "I won't hear of it. You're crazy. Get away from me. You're hurting me. Your words are violence." But I want to agree with you, JC, and say, just because I know that about Donald Trump does not mean that I'm for the other side, and I'm totally not for the other side. And I do think that there is, such a thing as the lesser evil. And absolutely, I thought that, hey, this might be the first time at the time in 2015, 16. I didn't know that about Donald Trump because I hadn't been paying attention to the news in 1995. And I thought to myself, okay, here's a rich businessman. Hopefully he's got his own money, doesn't need to be bribed by corporate interests. So this could be the first time in a long, long time we've had a leader of the Western world who cannot be bribed. So he might be clean. So at least there's a chance we might have somebody who's working for the American people, and by extension, everybody in the American empire, which is where everyone in the Western world lives. But it turned out not to be true. And once I found that out, then I realized, okay, my assumption there, or my extending of faith towards him, can now be rescinded,
Exactly.
So there you are.
But some people can't do that. Like, they are so in, like, they're so all in. And, and again, it comes down to, their friends are Trump fans and they have Trump's bumper stickers and Trump flags. And then you come back to exactly why they said he's more useful alive than dead, because that is exactly why. He has that kind of personality that is magnetic, and he can sell a ketchup popsicle to a lady in white gloves.
Yes. That's a nice Southern phrase.
Most certainly. But, he is the king of the con. You know what I mean? The king of the con. Like, he would have made the original Rothschild snake oil salesman, because that's where that comes from, right? Their ancestor who started the empire got his start set, in oil, petroleum products, and his very first product he sold was snake oil made from their petroleum. So, it's like it all comes back around. But he's learned from the best, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it really does. I can't even think of his name now, but it really does seem as if the great grandpappy Rockefeller was actually, finding the oil bubbling out of the ground in Philadelphia or wherever it was.
Oh, yeah. That's who I mean. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's who I mean was Rockefeller, not Rothschild.
But look, all this kind of an intermingled family anyway, and this, there's a phrase, I'll say it anyway, in what should be my native tongue, and it's Athenian Kirogella, and it means, it's a weird thing, but it means one beetle knows another one. It's kind of like birds of a feather flock together, right? They can recognize each other, and they don't even have to collude. They know that their interests coincide without having to have big meetings about it.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about with the pirate thing. Like, people are always wondering how this works and, like, exactly, how it's laid out. And, the way the best analogy I can put it, like, is, and this is the way they see themselves, like, Templars and pirates are basically the same thing. After 1307, they had to have something to do, and they had an entire fleet of ships and a treasure that just came up missing somewhere. So what do you think they did with all those ships? That's where the Jolly Roger comes from, the skull and crossbones, and it's all tied up with that. But the pirate council, like what you see in Pirates of the Caribbean, you remember the little pirate council where everybody sits down and has their little pieces of eight and all this mess?
Yes.
Think of it like that. Everybody is like, they're a Luciferian, they're for themselves, but they also all have they all have alignments as well. You know what I mean? Like, they don't always get along or agree. They might have some differences about how they expect to do something, but it's like really comes down to, like, people that work for the same company, fighting over a promotion. It's not, that's what I would equate like, a war like between Putin and Biden right now. They set up that dialectic, but Putin is every bit as much a WEF puppet as Biden is. It's just a matter of them, just like with Trump, they're giving you a show. That's all it is. It's just a show in order to get what they want. A convenient one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible thing to think that about Putin as well, because it seems just like Trump did in 2016. He seems like, okay, is he our guy? But none of them are our guys. They are
No.
inside a circle, and they might have an internal squabble, but they full sure know that everybody outside of their circle is not one of them, and their primary loyalty, or just there's no secondary loyalty. Their loyalty is to everybody within the circle, but they might have internal disputes. That's all.
Yeah. Well, that's why that third crown sits above the crown of church and state, because, the only king who never changes his mind is Christ.
Okay.
His opinion and his teachings remain the same no matter what. So, and that's why he's the King of Kings, he's steady.
Say that last thing again.
I said, Christ is steady. He doesn't, he's not going to turn into a despot. Now, the people that claim to serve him might, but he himself will always be.
Yes. Steady and immutable.
Yes, exactly. And that's the whole point.
And I'd imagine,
he's beyond all that. So he is the focus point. Like, he's that hinge point that everything else hinges on. He is that 0 point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to say that I think then it's going to have to be something simple, so that it doesn't get all confused and there's no room for semantics. It's just do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, and that would apply to anybody in the circle as outside of the circle.
Yeah, well, you get some crazy people that would strap on a vest and run and blow themselves and you up.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the thing I run into with libertarians. It's like, yeah, that works if you have if everybody agrees to like play nice and, basically come from, an honest point, but not everybody's going to do that. Some people are going to decide, well, I'm powerful enough. Why can't I just be God Emperor?
Well, what you said there about the vest, that is true. You could sort of say, all right, well, we'll all go into the fire, or we'll all drown then. And I am doing it to me the same as you. So that gets around that. But I would say that is, again, willfully misinterpreting something that should be obvious.
Yes, it should be obvious. But again, just like the interpretations of the Bible, just because you think it should be obvious doesn't necessarily mean it is.
I guess, though, like what I mean is that, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying what is obvious to me is not automatically obvious to you or anyone else. Like,
well, look,
it all depends on your experience.
Sorry, I talked over you there the last little bit there. What is your experience is not mine. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it like basically like how you interpret something is it's dependent on your experience and what exactly you already have in your head.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are all different in that regard. All of our experiences are not the same, and the emotional memory of our experiences is likely to trigger different reflex actions. So you're rarely talking to somebody who's in control of all the different experiences that led him to where he is and the emotional state that he's in.
Yeah, and that's another part of the spiritual growth is, you fast, you do all these things, you do the rituals, you come to church, all this stuff, it teaches you to be stronger and to be in more control of who you are. Like, as Orthodox, we're always trying to train ourselves. Like before something comes out of your mouth, actually think about it with an inner dialogue and run it past yourself and ask yourself, why am I saying this? Am I saying it coming from a selfish place? Am I saying this because I'm trying to get this person to think a certain way? Am I trying to manipulate them, or am I coming from, you see what I'm saying? You should always have this inner reflection and always be, constantly policing yourself, because we are so fallible.
Oh, absolutely. And if you don't do it, somebody else will swoop in and say, we'll have to be the authority over your mind and everybody else. It's just for everyone's safety, do you know?
That's correct, and that's where, like, I don't always agree with Jordan Peterson. His views on censorship lately have gotten me rather irritated, but it's one of those things that, like, it is all tied to responsibility. That willing acceptance of suffering and responsibility is tied to your freedom. Without willing acceptance of suffering and responsibility, there is no freedom, because somebody will come in and take it from you.
I think I
Like,
can agree with that on both counts. The suffering is a necessary effect of freedom, and taking responsibility for myself, absolutely. And I expect everybody else to be held responsible for their actions too. No, none of this. Oh, I didn't know. I'm too stupid to understand. I don't believe it anymore.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, at what point do you say, well, like, the information was given to you and you did, jack all with it. So, at what point do you just say, well, they're not gonna
Hmm.
play
I
ever.
think they're extinguishing their own light, and I think that is a morality which the dark ones do believe justifies what they're doing, and it's hard to argue against.
Yeah, it is. I held that view for a very, very long time, and I still have to fight against it every day.
Yeah.
There's still parts of me that when I see people acting, like I used to act, I see them, and, like, there's a part of me that wants to, like, be disgusted. There's a part of me that says, if they're willing to take a pokey poke and, poison themselves, or, whatever else, like, all I can do is warn them. And if they, do it anyway, that's their fault. But then at the same time, it's hard for me to be that cold.
Yes, and I will say that, another Shakespearean phrase there, the milk of human kindness, and I think that is from The Merchant of Venice. I want to expunge all of that from my heart. I want to put my heart in winter, or cauterize all of the ducts that might. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but I don't want to curdle that milk. That's what I should say.
Yes.
But that requires that I hold on just another few generations. That people will cotton or cop onto themselves, which I don't honestly think they're going to do. But however, I don't want to sort of, dig at all that again. I want to end it on a sort of a nice note, because we are coming up to 3 hours now, even though we said nearly at the end of the second hour we were going to take a break. Um,
Folks seem to like it, so, why not?
oh, they certainly do, and we got a lot of not just interest, but very positive comments, and they did want to know more. So look, I've kind of, maybe there was a few things that I wanted to say, but look, that round more or less kind of gets it there. We have to end it in some reasonable time frame. I know I did 4 hours there yesterday, but anyway, I didn't mean to do that. But here's what I want to say. I didn't expect to resolve this. I just want to kind of, maybe I'll finish on this, right? Um, it's not my job. It's not my intention either to try to convince you of my point of view that we should just write off all these people, all these useful idiots, as being irredeemable. I kind of want to do that. I feel that they deserve to do that. So more and more, I've been having more and more sympathy with the devil or his minions, because I can totally see from their point of view, but I'm willing not to put my heart into darkness then just yet. And like you said about policing your own mind, well, I think also there's a balance. So I shouldn't just go, okay, the other people, those darkness people have the answer. You said we should always police ourselves, our own mind, and we should question why we're doing what we're doing, or why we're about to say what we're about to say. I totally agree. We should say to ourselves, remind ourselves by asking, like, what am I trying to achieve here? What's my objective? What's the desired outcome that I'm looking for, and what's my motivation in what I'm doing or saying.
Mhm.
And nobody's perfect. We're gonna slip up from time to time, but for me, that's been like a guiding little function or program within my own mind. And I think we all have to develop these these tools within our own mind to cope with our own frailties. When we're weak-minded, sometimes we can fall back on tried and tested mental tools that we can develop. So that's, I think, my last say. So to sort of say it's unresolved, but I think that's the way to go. I don't think you even have to be in a religion to develop these, because I'm not even saying you have to be a psychologist. It's just
Well,
anybody can figure these things out for themselves. What do you want to say then to sort of wrap up? And
well,
we'll then talk about, and I'll just sort of say, and then we'll then talk about how maybe in the next discussion we might figure out a way to have a live discussion and have other people ask questions. Off you go, JC.
well, like in Orthodoxy, we have something that's called logos spermaticos, which is specifically that like you can have divine inspiration outside of the church. It is possible. It's rare, but like we would say like that every religion has a little bit of truth in it. That's why people are attracted to it, is the little bit of truth that's in there. But like we would say that Orthodoxy is the only one that has all of it in one place. But absolutely it is possible to be divinely inspired and to come to some of these conclusions by yourself. It absolutely is. It's just rare, and I would absolutely recommend that the best way to do everything safely and make sure that like you're going the right direction is to take the Orthodox path. Obviously, that's the point of view I argue from. It's what I believe is true. And that I'm always going to think that that's going to be the best route for people to take. And then but I will admit, there is the such thing as logos spermaticos, and it is possible for you to arrive at truth without being part of the church. And that is another thing that makes Orthodoxy different, is because we are confident enough in like us having the truth that we're not like the Romans, who will like absolutely not admit to like the fact that you could ever have access to any truth outside the church.
Yes. And look, there's a big history of the church. If they can't control it, they want to suppress the information. And then when the information can't be suppressed, they want to pretend that they invented it. As far as logos spermaticos goes, I'm going to say I don't think I heard of the term, but I see that it means like the germination of knowledge or truth or wisdom can maybe come from nowhere or just inside you. And I would say that is what makes us human, because in the scientific method, you gather your data, you examine the evidence, and then you form a theory. Now, there's no procedure for how you form a theory. That has to come from within, right? So that's the divine inspiration part. And I believe that everybody was born with divine inspiration. And if you choose not to use it, you're willfully turning against God. You're suppressing truth. You're suppressing the light and extinguishing the light within you. And I think that's why the people who are working for the devil or whoever, I think they're saying, look, God, they're doing it to themselves. Look what your creation are doing. They're expunging the light that you put in them.
That's what
So we're
Lucifer
not
did.
even, yeah. So, well, sorry, you're saying that's what Lucifer did to himself, is it?
No, well, no, that when Lucifer had that in Job, Lucifer has this conversation with God, and like that's where the deal was struck, where God allows Lucifer to tempt us. Lucifer told God that we would be better off like just exterminating all of creation altogether, and that humans were awful, and that we would always betray him, and all these other kind of things, and that
Mm.
that's another thing. When you hear the left talk, it doesn't matter what religion they espouse, that out of their mouths. When you actually listen to what they're saying, the things they are saying are repeating all the same things that you hear Lucifer say. Like
Well,
it comes back. That's why it always comes back to the Christian paradigm, is because like there's no way around it. Every time you turn around, that's where it always goes.
look, I know I said I was going to try and wrap it up, but we'll keep it around the 3 hours here now, and I will just sort of finish it up, and I'll just sort of say, well, we again seem to be fundamentally disagreed, but I'll have to be honest, right? Because I would be dishonest if I didn't say like what you're describing there, and the devil, like, look, pointing to God's creation and saying, look what you've created, you might as well destroy them now. They'll always betray you anyway. They can never be counted on to do the right thing. that is what I've been saying. So I have total sympathy with the devil, but I don't necessarily want to call final judgment now. Right? So I'm reserving judgment just yet, assuming that I'm on a jury of 12 angry men. I haven't casting my final vote just yet. I'm reserving judgment just yet because there might be some information I'm not aware of yet, or they might pull victory from the jaws of defeat at the very last moment, even though I'll be kind of going, oh, so cliched, you know. But what about
Yeah,
questions, or do you want to respond to that and then talk about how we might have questions from people if we do a live stream in our next conversation?
sure, sure. I was just gonna say, like, it's important to really mull over that part. Like, well, it's important to mull over all parts of the story overall, but that there's a saying, be careful, cursing the devil or whatever, like, because you just might be just as bad as he is, you know, in a lot of ways. So yeah, like you're like I told you earlier, you're coming from a point of view that I understand fundamentally because it's a point of view I've had myself. I understand it. I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I was there. Like, it's exactly the kind of thought process I used to have. And it's exactly the kind of thought process that is driving the elite to think that all this shit is okay. To be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
So look, I guess then, look, we are kind of in agreement, and I think you'd agree with me by saying like that there is merit to the argument, and it's difficult to find a flaw in the argument. And I think we should see all of this as like that humanity is on trial, and the court is in session, and the devil for the case is making the case for the prosecution, and the people in the jury are kind of going, this guy is really convincing. I wonder what God's going to say, and God's just staying out of it for now, And he's sort of saying, no, we'll leave it up to them to defend themselves. They'll show you eventually, and maybe they
yeah,
will. And the other thing I guess I would say is, look, I know that none of us are perfect. So if I would say God or the devil or whoever, smite them all because they should know better, well then we'd all be gone. And I don't think I really want that either. It'd be a lonely universe if they got rid of all the humans. If this is what it is, if we're
yeah.
if that's it.
It's like I told you before, I endeavor my best to be consistent, you know? And if I was to count them out, I would be being terribly inconsistent considering how, like, I was the absolute last person on earth that I ever thought would be espousing this kind of philosophy or this point of view, but yet here I am.
Hmm.
It's part and parcel to why I have so much faith, because I've seen miracles happen, and I've learned not to count God out just yet,
Well,
or humanity
JC,
for that matter.
say the last thing again. Sorry.
I say I learned not to count God, Christ, or humanity out just yet. We're made in His image, and like He lives in us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, I have thought about that. I keep saying I want to wrap it up in a nice bow there, but I have thought about that God may be resting piece by piece in the soul of every individual human. And you've probably heard the theory as well that God split himself up into all the different atoms of the universe to have an experience. It's kind of like an atheistic type of religiosity, and that if we destroy any of it or ourselves, that he'll never be able to be put back together again. So that you're destroying God if you destroy any of humanity.
For us, like as Orthodox, we believe like Christ enters us when we take communion. Like that's establishing that connection with Him and keeping it, keeping that telephone line open, so to speak. It's like in the story of Solomon. He ends up marrying Bathsheba and worshiping her gods, and God's spirit leaves him. And it ends up being like right before he dies that he ends up repenting and, making that right with God. But, it's a good illustration of what has happened to a lot of people. They've done what we call darkening the noose. They've allowed, like, the noose in the Orthodox point of view is like, it's like the eye of the heart. You know what I'm saying? It's how the heart sees. And what the left has done, what Western society has done, is darken that. They've closed that eye to where they can no longer see. They can't discern right from wrong anymore. They've completely capitulated their noose, to evil. Like they've just let it go. They've said, it's too hard. Somebody else do it.
Yeah, and it made me, when you were talking about darkening the news, it made me think of the black ball and the black patch and all the other things to do with pirates. And I was going to say, look, what I'm really glad of is that we've been having a conversation that I believe transcends all the. It's almost like a prurient interest in all the little secrets, and because there's things that are more important than that. And I think we've shown that it goes above. I'm not speaking about the Orthodox Church, but it certainly goes above all the different churches and all these kind of things, the institutions of man and everything else. And it's basically about, like, what if there is more to life than just having a house and a wife and a car and blah blah blah, and you're born and you die and that's it, and you're looking for your purpose and you have a career and you're successful and that. What if that there is more to it than most people are willing to want to realize, even those people who are in name only churchgoers and all this sort of stuff? I think we have had an extremely useful conversation here that will and has contributed to the sum total of people pushing back against whatever this is and saying, fine, right, okay, we're really at the very edge of the chessboard here. There's no moves left, but we still got to keep going because the game isn't over yet.
I would agree. Like, the game most certainly isn't over. The game isn't over until, like, the sun stops burning, type deal. Like, as long as that sun keeps coming up in the morning, then we have to keep digging deeper and fighting. It's what we're here for. Man is made to toil and struggle.
Can you finish off that quote?
Well, I mean, we just are born to, we're born to struggle. Like, it's part of it's part of the fall. When man fell, like, we went from the garden, which was abundance and never having to worry, to now, like, we have to till the fields and the earth to grow our food. And now we have to store for the winter and worry about the future and, reflect about the present and the future with, against the past. And all these different things came into being when the fall happened. And that struggle, it keeps coming back to that struggle and that willing acceptance of responsibility. Like, we are just born to that struggle, like, and we're tied to it. We can't, if we let it go, then, as we were talking about earlier, all of our freedoms are going to go with it. And there won't be any getting them back, at least not in our lifetimes, for sure.
Yeah, that's it. I think that if digital currency is brought in, it's game over. And like you said there, as far as the fall, I remember reading as well, like the same thing in the Greek myths and legends, that when Pandora's box was opened, from that moment on, man had to toil in the soil for his food, had to work for a living when all the evils were let in.
Yep. Winter came, and like now it's not summer all the time. Now the earth has seasons, and you will freeze to death if you don't prepare. You'll starve. It's hard, but like, that's part of that willing acceptance, that capitulation. That's part of what the submitting to God teaches you to do. It teaches you to submit to that struggle and, like, accept it. Not only accept it, but to like revel in it. And, like, I suppose that's a big change in me over the years, is the fact that when bad things happen, I'm still, like always, tempted to get angry or upset about it, or to be woe is me. But, I shake that off, and I understand that, like, this is part of my journey. This is my dragon to slay. And if I want to, like, really be the man I'm meant to be, then I've got to slay it. Nobody else is going to do it for me.
Yes. And fighting your own personal demons and going on your own journey. I hate to say it because it sounds so cliched, but as you get older, you find out that, like, these sort of, well, catchphrases in a way, but it's not exactly that. But they are nuggets of truth, as tiresome as it turns out to be for me. But look, again, I want to say I think this has been a great conversation. I think I'm not trying to compare it and say it's been better, but I think it's been even better than the last one, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I kind of do hate to end it, but I think it's never going to end. But we should leave some for our next conversation. And so I
Yeah.
just want to ask you, let's sort of put it out there because people will listen to this part now as well if they listen to the end. And maybe they'll be thinking about questions they might like to ask you. What would you like to say about, how you'd like it to go and how the format of it, how you'd like people to ask questions or whatever? What are your thoughts on that?
I have thought about it, and like I started out with just the mission of like I want to help in any which way I can, you know. But like as this went on, like I really have enjoyed it a lot, and I think that we have a lot to talk about, you know, even if it's just an interesting commentary for people to listen to, like as everything falls apart, like if it can help even one person, then it's worth it. And I think we could probably even make a regular series out of this. I don't like the two of us can probably talk enough to where we can probably keep it going for a long time. And we might even can pull a show out of this
Yeah,
if you
well,
want
listen,
to co-host or
I want to say that I guess my attitude is that and I have to be honest here, like I've seen people make careers out of talking, and I know I'm real long-winded. And I'm conflicted about that because I want always my objective to be like you. I just want to help people. And when you said it sounds so, because I'm good like that, right? You understand? I'm being sarcastic here, but because it sounds sickly sweet for me to say something like that. Um, but when you said if it only helps one person, then that's good enough, and I would have to be content with that. And part of being humble is that I can't be the one to save the world, but if you just make a difference in one person's life, then that does have to be good enough, and it often is if you actually you know understand what a difference it is to make just a positive change in one person's life.
yeah. I mean, since going on this path, like I've had people come up to me and say thank you, and I have to be careful not to let that become my motivation for things. But I would be lying if I didn't say that, like it's the absolute best feeling like I've ever had. Outside of being a father or any of that kind of stuff, it's up there on my list. And
Well, look, yeah, look, I agree, and it's nice to feel nice or good about ourselves that we did a good thing whenever we do a good thing. And I don't want to pour water on it, but I have to say we do have to be absolutely careful anytime we feel good about ourselves for having done a good deed, because that just means you got your reward and starts feeding your ego. You know what I mean? And then suddenly the devil has got an inroad into you, going, yeah, what about making a career out of this, and you'll get the love and adulation of everyone in the world. That kind of way. That's how he gets into you. That sort of way.
I feel like Christ would say it this way: do your evil deeds in the light and do your good deeds in the dark.
Yes.
It's one of those things that that's why I say I have to be really careful not to let it feed my ego and let that become my motivation for things. I do want, helping people is my motivation, but I don't want it to be for my own gratification.
Well, that's exactly it. It cannot be for self gratification. And you know, uh, I think I was talking to you. If not, it was somebody else. But it doesn't matter about the ego. And the moment that you feel that you have suppressed your ego and become wise is the moment you become a fool again. So,
Yeah.
like you said about policing your own mind, you have to be on top of yourself all the time, and you're going to have moments of weakness, which is why I think everyone has to develop their own mental um, crutches. I think to put in braces, for your mind when it's feeling weak.
Right. Very true. Very true. And it's something I don't always achieve it as I'd like to, but it's a work in progress as always.
Yes. while we're live, we're continuous works in progress. So look, will we leave it at that? I think we're gonna come back with some kind of format where we might start off by just resuming a conversation and then opening it up to the floor, whoever's listening, and they could answer questions by text. I don't know if it would be necessary to sort of say, here, somebody can come on and speak their question. Maybe that's something that would add something to it if you can't type out a long question. So again,
A lot of people, like, you know, people will just, you know, they'll type into the chat like their questions, and, you know, with an or they'll super chat or something and ask a question toward the end of the conversation, you know, when the floor is open, and then you can answer and stuff. You know, maybe something like that'll work.
Yeah, well, look, I don't have super chats or anything like that, and it's not so big that we need to have any particular comments highlighted.
The ats or whatever, those usually work. That way it lights up red when they have
exactly. They could do the at when they have a question, and so they could do at j.c.owens. Sorry, j.c.owens. Yeah, and I guess, right, there's a character limit. Maybe it's 160 characters. Maybe it is possible to get it, you know, generally a question that's concise enough. Maybe not for me, but for most people, into a single line of text like that.
Right. Like, you know, we can, you know, it's a matter of trial and error. You know, like we'll figure it out one way or the other. You know, both of us are kind of new to this, I imagine. I don't think you've had a show before or anything, have you?
No, I mean, I've been on some people's streams and internet radio and that kind of thing, but as a guest, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Like, you're the first person I've ever talked to like this at all, other than people in person, you know.
Great. Well, I mean, I think we're not doing so bad, neither of us, anyway. And I also appreciate when we're not perfect, because I think that shows that we're genuine, authentic. We're not. If we were too polished, people would be saying like, "Yeah, too good to be true." You know what I mean? These guys are just looking for money or whatever it is. You know, that sort of way.
I'm not really interested in people's money as much. Like, if I was, like, I probably wouldn't be talking about the stuff I'm talking about.
Yes,
really.
And I know you're taking a certain amount of risk. We'll remind people of that as well. So I guess as far as the question, because I'll just, you know, remind people, like, you know, of having been a former Mason and Templar, Knights Templar, and that I guess, like they say about the CIA or the FBI, you never really are allowed to leave it. They might leave you alone for a while, but you've always got to look over your shoulder. So there's some personal risk that you're always taking, and I know people might be interested to ask you questions about that, but I guess we're going to get a mix of questions that are interested in that aspect, and also in the maybe more transcendent, religious, philosophical type areas. I guess.
Yeah, I'm game for them all.
Good. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that, and we'll talk again pretty soon, but we'll arrange it offline.
All right. Sounds good, my brother.
All right. Cheers for now, then.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening to you.